Yo, what is up, my friends? Welcome to another episode of Dostcast. मेरा नाम है Vinamre and Shaleen. If you are new to our YouTube channel, please subscribe because we release new episodes every Tuesday and Friday at 12 p.m. Indian Standard Time. If you're listening to this podcast on an audio platform, make sure you give us 5 सितारे क्योंकि हमें भारत में सबसे निराले. आज की हमारी गेस्ट का नाम है Shaleen Wadhwana. She is an art curator, an art walk leader, a researcher, a writer. She was recently in the news because she was a part of the team that was responsible for telling the world कि भाई साहब सुनो, ब्रिटिश म्यूजियम के अंदर जितने भी आर्टिफैक्ट्स हैं उनके अंदर से बहुत सारे चोरी के हैं और उनमें से कुछ इंडिया से भी आए हैं. इस पॉडकास्ट पे हमने साथ साथ कोहिनूर की रिपैट्रिएशन लॉज की बात तो करी, साथ में ये भी बात करी हाउ टू डिजाइन आर्ट करिकुलम्स फॉर स्टूडेंट्स. आई एम गोना रीड आउट अ लिस्ट ऑफ द थिंग्स शी इज डन दैट आई थिंक यू विल रियली एंजॉय. Shaleen has an MA in History of Art from SOAS, University of London, where her dissertation was Drunk with Plunder, situating the biographies of objects looted during the 1857 mutiny in British India. Shaleen has a career that is too long and too wide-ranging for me to read out on camera and do justice. तो उनका LinkedIn attached है. You can check out all her wonderful achievements. मैंने खुद Shaleen के साथ काम करा है at India Art Fair, where she was leading all the fantastic art walkthroughs. I can tell you for a fact that she is someone who's extremely knowledgeable when it comes to not only just decolonized history, but also history of art. And सबके मन में जो सवाल है, क्या हम कोहिनूर को वापस ला पाएंगे? Clickbait, let's go, my friends. The episode with the wonderful Shaleen Wadhwana begins in 3, 2, 1. Anyway, Shaleen Wadhwana in the house. What is up? Been a while.
It's been a minute.
Yeah, although we just had dinner at that lovely place in Kailash Colony Market.
Yes,
Juggernaut. Huh? I'm so glad to be back in the studio and so glad that the first person I'm speaking to after a decade out of limelight is you. So Shaleen, हम लोग introduction तो बहुत बढ़िया कर ही देंगे, right? Which is a separate thing. You wear too many hats for anyone to describe, right? I mean, anywhere from an art walk curator to a normal curator to a teacher, ठीक है? To a writer, and then even doing primary research for the Unfiltered tour, which is the stuff of legend now, right?
सच बोल रहे हो, सब सच, सही अच्छा चल रहा है.
लेकिन मेरे को थोड़ा contextualize करने के लिए ना, I saw that you have this thing called 100 how-tos,
yes.
right? Which is basically around educating people about the world of art, right?
Absolutely.
Especially because जैसे उस दिन हम लोग बात कर रहे थे, I came to know that you started your career as a curator at a gallery, Kimold.
Yes.
Kimold, Prescott Road, right? Bhai, the name Kimold and the name Prescott Road, right? Anyone outside of the arts, they will have no idea.
Absolutely.
I went to the India Art Fair to understand how the art world worked. I only understand 5% of it now. I was at a 0, ठीक है?
That's
but
very
because
good.
Yeah, but because you've been a teacher and you help people understand, can we start with like a broad understanding of how to approach the arts? Anywhere from say मुश्किल टॉपिक है.
अरे यही टॉपिक मेरा करियर, लेकिन ये बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग और मुश्किल टॉपिक है.
अच्छा, ठीक है. तो कोई बेसिक चीज़, कैन पीपल गो टू गैलरीज टू स्टार्ट सीइंग आर्ट, या फिर you know, like, because I remember I was at Anika's place and she had a book about Fonseca, I believe that's the artist, the Goan artist, and I was moved to almost tears. I mean, obviously I hid it, but I was like, dude, we do so much online stuff, but we don't really have a physical material understanding of things. But the arts, मतलब आप लोग सिर्फ और सिर्फ physical material चीज़ों के अंदर विश्वास रखते हो, उनके आसपास रहते हो, तो yeah, but there is no way I could have come across it had I not visited her place. And she has like, she's deeply immersed in that world and so are you, right? तो हम कैसे इसकी तरफ जा सकते हैं?
बहुत ही आपने अच्छा डिस्टिंक्शन बनाया within the tangible and the intangible. I understand that, you know, a lot of the online world that we're immersed in is absolutely intangible. It's not something that you can touch or feel. It is just something that exists.
Right.
Now, when it comes to the tangibility, मेरी जर्नी एक्चुअली म्यूज़ियम में शुरू हुई थी. मैं वहाँ पे मार्केटिंग और प्रोग्रामिंग हैंडल करती थी, और ये एक ट्रांसपोर्ट बेस्ड म्यूज़ियम है. एक्चुअली इट्स कॉल्ड द हेरिटेज ट्रांसपोर्ट म्यूज़ियम, और वो तावड़ू में है.
Where is तावड़ू?
गुड़गांव के आगे.
ओके.
बिलासपुर के पास. वहाँ पे मेरा काम ये था कि लोग म्यूज़ियम आके देखें जो दिल्ली के 1.5 आवर्स बाहर है. तो कैसे होने वाला था पता नहीं, लेकिन पूरी जो इंडियन सब कॉन्टिनेंट की हिस्ट्री है वो हम ट्रक्स, कार्स, buses, शिप्स, बोट्स से दिखाते हैं. तो वहाँ पे मुझे ये समझ आया कि अरे ये बनाना बहुत आसान है लेकिन लोगों को उसके साथ इंटरैक्ट कराना और भी मुश्किल. सो what concerned me when I was 22 when I was doing this job is that okay, this is very difficult. I'm extremely passionate about the space of the arts, museums, culture, galleries, you name it. I'm passionate about all of it. But to make a career out of it, to make something sustainable out of it, and to ensure that people keep interacting with it in a sustainable manner throughout. How does that happen? So from learning that in a museum it is very different. You just have to pay a ticket and you can go and see. The revenue structure is completely different over there. When I started working at Kohinoor Prescott Road, I was the sales and strategy director. It was a very different job where it's a commercial setup. We're selling art. That is the job of the gallery space, along with it being one of India's oldest galleries. So there's a legacy aspect attached. I mean, it's more than 50 years old. It was opened in 1963. Then you have the aspect of the fact that there is this perception that या तो आर्टवर्क मैंने ये बहुत बार सुना है मेरे सारे टूर्स में, ये तो मैं भी बना सकता हूँ, ये तो मैं भी बना सकती हूँ. सोचा होगा तुमने भी सोचा होगा ये.
अब नहीं सोचा.
अच्छा ठीक है.
Ever since I've come to know friends who are artists and I've been around the fair and met people like you, I've changed my mind.
Oh, okay. Impact. चलो. नहीं. So a lot of the times I deal with a very basic question that, you know, why is this so valuable? Why is this art? I can make it. And that is also true that yes, we can make that. But I think there are different aspects to the fact that how do you arrive at it, the skill and the training that it takes to make art, and also the time and the context in which you made art, that is also what makes it valuable. So पहले खुद को ये समझना था मुझे. तो है हिस्ट्री की डिग्री, आर्ट हिस्ट्री की डिग्री. पहले ये थियोरेटिकली समझा है मैंने कि ये ऐसा क्यों होता है. फिर एक कॉन्टेक्स्ट में दूसरे लोगों को समझाना, इट टोटली डिपेंड्स ऑन द पर्सन स्टैंडिंग इन फ्रंट ऑफ मी. दैट इज़ द ट्रू स्किल ऑफ समवन हु इज़ एबल टू एक्सप्लेन थिंग्स वेल, एंड दैट इज़ ऑल्सो व्हाट मेक्स अ ग्रेट टीचर, which I hope to keep continuing to be, is to take something very, very complex and explain it very simply. So we're based, Kohinoor Prescott Road is based in South Bombay. It's in the 4th district, also known Kolaba. So over there, mostly if there's an art collector, they know already what they're looking for. If there's a student, it is my joy to keep explaining to them that, you know, this is made by this artist who's had this journey, and the reason why they made this is this. There's a narrative I can attach, and I can speak in the language that they'd be comfortable listening in. It is when I don't get either a student or a collector, and when I get everybody in the middle, that's an interesting challenge, because there you're trying to speak to, if it is someone that wants an artwork to match the color of their homes, I have to also kind of arrive at that with them, that, you know, what would look good, what would look good, why would it look good.
You're making all these decisions with them?
I'm making these decisions in conversations with them. So the important part is having that conversation and being personable and approachable, to be able to make that other person feel comfortable enough to say that, yes, I want this to look good in my home, but can you also tell me more? When I can make them arrive at that point, can you tell me more? Okay, that's when I've done one step more beyond my job. Is just make them curious. If the other person's curious, like I've got it. Like I've done my job, and I can, you know, keep pushing that curiosity to more and more towards more passionate questions about art. Once I've done that, then I've done my job.
On that, because on the last day of the fair, we were so busy, we couldn't even see the art, right? The artworks there. I have to commend you on the fact that khali diwarein. I think you did a walkthrough with us, the team, and a few other people who were working in the sidelines of the fair, on the sidelines of the fair. And I remember जहाँ आर्ट पड़ा हो, कुछ उसके अंदर से आर्ट लिटरली प्लास्टिक में रैप हो रहा है वापस, राइट? But you decided, hey, listen, you guys didn't see the art, come, I'll take you. And I still remember it was one of the best days from that fair, because here I am speaking, you're speaking to us, we're looking at white walls where there's a keel lagi hui hai bas, and you're painting these grand stories about इस इंसान ने ये मटेरियल यहाँ से लिया है. And then also, what you also do well, is use not just like इसने इसमें ये clay लगाया ये करा है, because that could be too technical, right? You also attach narratives like what does this painting style mean for example, the history of like a certain class in India, right? Things like that. क्योंकि वो ज़रूरी हो जाती हैं.
Of course.
And then you also took us to all the controversial ones, right? Like you're like, let's definitely talk about these.
Yeah.
How many hours a day or hours in a month do you have to spend just collecting stuff to really have a knowledge कि यार इस artwork के बारे में ये बात कर सकती हूँ या इस artwork के बारे में वो बात कर सकती हूँ?
Oh my God, that's such a good question. Because if I had to put a number, I think the number reduces with the amount of time you've spent in the industry. The number of hours reduce.
Okay.
Which means that if I was doing this at the museum that I told you about where I started, as a fresher, I had to read so much, and I was also very underconfident that what I'm saying, is it accurate or not? Bhai, ye cart kab bana tha? And I would keep referring because it when you're young and starting out, at least for me, there was a lot of underconfidence कि भाई जो मैं बोल रही हूँ वो सही है कि नहीं, ये समझ आएगा कि नहीं, और उससे ज़्यादा कि भाई ये किस साल में बना था, ये कैसे बना था. I would keep referring to my notes because I'd be so scared of saying something wrong. That's at 22. Now I'm 31. So what also happens with time and with consistently doing one aspect that you do for so very long is that the time from assimilating that information in my mind and being ready to be able to kind of contextualize it for the audience, that process happens faster now. It's not any less hard work, but I just think that because that skill has developed so much of articulating it fast, contextualizing it basis the audience I have in front of me. The use case scenario for us was that we were all the staff at the fair. The deinstallation process was happening. The walls were almost empty. So what is the best thing I could have done for y'all is to, in that moment, explain it as if I was explaining each aspect of the work, the story behind it, why the person made it, but to do it in a way that you and your eyes are able to picture somewhere the same thing that I'm trying to talk to you about. Because I knew the thing कि दिवाले खाली ये तो मुझे इनके लिए ऐसे करना ही पड़ेगा. When it comes to, for example, let's say very young children, and I have taken children on tours, very, very young ones. There was once a show at Kohinoor Prescott Road, which was made by an artist who had made a set of soft sculptures about the memories of the time she had spent with her husband who had passed. So the whole show was actually surrounding about what happens after the dying of and death of a loved one. It's a very heavy topic, which as adults we struggle. And in art also it was depicted very richly, with so many colors, with so much trauma, with so many interesting gestures that are happening to the figures that she's made. There was a group of 4 to 6-year-olds that had come. And we were just shocked. Why were they there? Because there was a miscommunication. And they're these eager-looking, very cute bunch of kids. And everybody looked at me, obviously, because I have the public-facing role over there. They're like, okay, now you take them. I had trouble talking about the subject with adults, with refined collectors, who knew about the practice, who knew about the artist, who knew about her journey. This is Dhruvi Acharya, the artist. And then suddenly I'm looking at these kids and I'm like, okay, let me try. Because the joy maybe over there is, as an adult, you have experienced grief in some way. You've experienced the passing of someone in some way. But over here, the kids were blank canvases, and the kind of questions that they had. Why is her heart looking like this? Why have they made these things coming out of her head? Why does the painting shine? Which is basically like a primer put on the painting. Why is this sculpture looking like this? Why is it that drawn on that? Their questions were very, very unfettered. They were bindas. They did not care about the impact of those questions. They were asking from a very genuine place, which was also very fearless. Adults fear asking these questions. So when the kids asked them, I was also able to answer a lot without baggage. I was able to answer without baggage. So that's also, in those years, I learned that actually the conversation is guided by the people. It's always about the people. It's actually not about me or my knowledge. It's about the people. The moment the people ask their first set of questions, my job is to just get them to ask their first set of questions. I can then understand where my audience is at. what are they curious about, what is the level of their pre-existing knowledge, and I take it from there. It is just, it's about the people. It's always about the people. It is where they're coming from, where their emotions are at, what are they curious about, how much do they already know, and can I work within that context and explain it to them? Because it's not about me or my knowledge, the gallery, the museum. No, it's not about all of that. It's actually always about the people. It's very people driven. Once I understood that, I think this also became a lot more easier, because I can study this much about the artwork, about the museum, about the object. I can study this much. But if I'm not able to actually speak to the person, then I feel that what was the point of knowing all of that?
Right.
So I flipped it. I made it, it was not about me. It was not about what I knew. It was not about the technicalities of art historical theory. No, all that is fine. It's great, but it's fine. It's about the person. It's always about the person in front of me. When I understand that, okay, this is where they are at, and I can make this journey happen for them, it's easy. That is what makes it easy in the last 9 years. That's what has made this easy.
Damn. And also, I think with children ask fearless questions because they... Like, I remember one day my cousin asked me, tornadoes kaise hote hain? Like, shit, I had no idea. then we Googled it and we sat down. I think, it's important to ask elemental questions, and we don't ask them. This is one of the problems with, like, because you see art, you're like, I must ask a very intense and abstract question.
Exactly.
So what do you think the artist was trying to communicate with the subtle touch of their brush?
And there's an answer to that.
Huh.
That is a valid question, and there is an answer to that. But I think if you ask, or if a younger, more fearless member of the audience will ask, why is it there? Why have you put it? That is the word. That.
So which brings us to an interesting point. Now you also worked as a curator, right? Ek to walk wali cheez ho gayi, right? Where you're leading these art walks, which are fantastic. ये सारी बातें होती हैं कि तो gatekeeping होती है, ये सब होता है, all of those things, right? and yet, no, but I think hota hoga, I'm sure. There is gatekeeping and curation happening anywhere from playlists to your podcast preferences.
Absolutely.
Right? To the sort of people you decide to meet, right? You're curating at all times, right?
Absolutely.
This whole process of curation, now is it based on a theme? Is it based on if the artist is available? Is it based on someone's personal preference? Like, does there a committee जो बैठती है decide करती है कि आज इस gallery में ये 36 तरह की painting लगेंगी?
Okay. All of that, not bad. Almost all of that. So I started independently curating shows 2019 onwards. But when I was working at Chemold, I had seen about 36, 37 shows go up and down, like install and deinstall in front of me. That was my MBA curatorial degree all rolled into one. Once you see it happen in that context, that information through osmosis also enters into you. So I have no such degree in curation or any curatorial studies. It is a lot of learning by doing, by seeing it happen in front of you. So when I started curating 2019 onwards, it's a mix of everything you said. What am I genuinely curious about are basically, I'm curious about history. कहीं पे कुछ मुझे history का तो aspect डालना है, मुझे बहुत अच्छा लगता है. The other is contemporary social issues, especially जो mainstream से थोड़ा बाहर हैं. और ये टफ हो जाता है क्योंकि हम मेन स्ट्रीम में हैं, हम प्रिविलेज्ड हैं, हम कैसे ये नॉन प्रिविलेज चीज़ों की बातें कर सकते हैं. लेकिन मेरा सोचना है कि हमें ही तो करनी है ये बातें, हमारी ही प्रिविलेज स्पेसेस में ये बातें होनी चाहिए. एंड इट्स ऑल्सो दैट यू नो द स्पेसेस ऑफ गैलरीज, commercial settings, they also end up being privileged to certain types of people.
But they're all free to enter, by the way.
They're all free to enter.
ये तो मेरे को पता ही नहीं था, शायद लोगों को पता ही नहीं है ये.
What? Yes,
जितने भी लोग देख रहे हैं उन्हें पता नहीं होता ना, सारी गैलरीज में फ्री में जा सकते हो.
Yes.
They just look intimidating. They're free to go into.
Absolutely, all of them are free to go into. In fact, some museums you have to pay money to enter, but galleries are free, absolutely free. Yes. And I also felt that, see, it's curating such themes may not necessarily be the most commercially successful shows. So, for example, I had done this one show at Vadhera Art Gallery. It was titled Fringe. And I also received some amount of criticism for the same, because when I'm not from the fringes, can I talk about the fringes? So that is a whole other massive debate. But it had to happen. It had to happen in such a space like that, because galleries are also wide cube spaces, which also means that they're bare walls, and whatever you put on them is basis the artist and the curator's imagination and understanding. That curation was themed around how do the artists that I have chosen that are there in the Wadhwana gallery roster, because sometimes there's that sort of relationship where, I like certain artist practices, I'd like to bring them into a group show. Sometimes it is that gallery having certain artists that also match that. So it was that middle ground meeting point. And even there, so one of the artists responded about how the minority communities are treated. One of the artists responded about, how digital access is not equal across the country, even in the pandemic. It only depends on whether you have access to internet or a smartphone that has made your life smooth for the last couple of years. There was another artist who was looking at the role of women within the understanding of Christian imagery and how that has changed, and how that has so many different communities that respond to it, not just one understanding of the Virgin Mary, which is, white and Caucasian. So there are these very important narratives coming in. There's another artist who looked at nightmares. What do nightmares look like? And put nightmares on a paper. And a lot of those nightmares on paper actually dealt with themes of things that scare us. Homosexuality. We have internalized homophobia. How certain parts of our society are secure, certain are not. That disparity. So there are these really interesting, uncomfortable topics. There are also responses around the queer community, which I belong to. So that was also very important for me to bring it in. Now, this is stressful amount of conversations to have. And I think that when this happens, there's also an amount of sensitivity that gets increased in the audience and in the people that are involved in this process.
What do you mean by that? Like they're more easily offended, or?
What I mean by sensitivity is that I try to inculcate sensitivity around such topics in the way they are written about, inculcate sensitivity in the way they are received. Maybe when it comes to access, talk a little bit more about the fact that, which we weren't able to manage in this show, but have linguistically more available versions of the same text that is written about the show beyond English. Try and have like an online 3D map of it spread so everybody can actually see what it is without having to visit, able to visit. Sensitivity around writing also means that I'd also have to check in a lot about what I am writing, because I'm also writing from a certain lens. And I think that is a very, very big learning when curating with such topics. It requires to constantly also critique yourself a lot.
But किस degree तक? I mean, sure, you're going to have your biases. So do you not run the risk of writing something that doesn't affect anyone because it's so neutral?
Oh, God, yes. I had that risk. I learned a lot from this show about what can or can't be done, how it can be done, how does something difficult like this get handled. And all that learning I used in 2021, 2022 when I curated another show, and gap bhi hai, 2019 se itna. So I also learned a lot about what it is that I want to say. How do I want to say it? So in end of 2021, early 2022, the Sindhu Project was a show that I had curated at Exhibit 320, which is another gallery in Delhi. And over there, what I had spoken about was, it was an Indian artist and a Pakistani artist. They're both based in the US, and they had actually worked around everything to do with the Sindhu River, which is basically Indus Valley civilization, Gandharan art and architecture, which leads back to Buddhism, for example. And, the ways in which India and Pakistan have had a history that is a lot more connected and wider in our past. But in the modern times, because both have been independent only for about 75 years, which is a very short amount of time, compared to the shared history that this river has had for us. The Sindhu River is the Indus River.
So it's I've heard about the river, of course, but is it like one river bank is India, one river bank is Pakistan?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the Indus River fuels both the countries. And the both countries, and I'm able to say both countries simply because in 75 years ago, there was a border that was decided that these are both countries. But before that, this is the river that ensured Indus Valley civilization flourished here, because the major civilizations across the world, Mesopotamia, China, they flourished around rivers. That is why this river was important. And what these two artists have done is brilliant. The Indian artist went to the Indus Valley sites within India and studied them. The Pakistani artist went to the Takshila Valley in Pakistan and studied the Gandharan sites over there. They created artworks modern day in response to a lot of the ways they understood these sites. So I put up this show. And as you rightly said, so one of the artists was represented by Exhibit 320, which is why we had the show over there. The same thing we did. We did 3D mapping, we spread the word out and everything. But this time, I had a lot more of a thicker skin. I knew that we were dealing with a topic with a country that we've had at multiple times different types of stressful relationships with.
We've been at war with Pakistan also several times.
That's also one way to say the same. Yes, absolutely. And then to have this very culturally collaborative exhibition, which also makes no political statement, but by virtue of its existence and the fact that there is the fact that we've worked with the Pakistani artist, we were also prepared for like a lot of
pushback,
censure, pushback. ये तुमने यहाँ ऐसे कैसे बोल दिया? ये. Because something that we all forget is that Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, because a lot of times we use Harappan civilization, because of the present day boundaries, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are in Pakistan. They're not in India.
Damn. I had no idea. I just use these
interchangeable terms. I know.
No, I just use like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, like just they're words that don't really have a conviction behind them. Just blanket words for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, in a lot of the artworks that I would conduct of my own exhibition, with these artists that have worked on this for 7 years, I myself am a history student and an independent researcher that has worked with this aspect of history, again for 8-9 years. When I would obviously talk about this in my artworks at the exhibition, I would see someone from the audience just be like, did she say Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are not in India? I didn't see that happen. I'm like, oh God.
But that's a good feeling, no? It's like...
It's a good feeling as long as that person is not like, excuse me, can you repeat?
No, in the sense that ek to hota ki you dazzle the audiences with your skill. Surprise is a very valuable tool. I think surprise and shock is more valuable.
Yeah, is closer to what they were feeling. Not a pleasant surprise, please. I think this is the first. Also, I was a lot more surer about what I was doing this time. I can admit that. So, certain colleges and universities that were teaching history, which was a very relevant work that we had covered, a part of their curriculum, they were very willing to like collaborate with us, have their students attend our exhibition and everything, and certain universities were not. And as someone that has worked with universities, I was shocked that someone would not want to collaborate on such an exhibition that has everything to do with connected histories. So there was that. That was an interesting way to lose out on certain collaborations. I had a very interesting conversation. I had hosted a panel with one historian from India, it's very well known, Dr. Naman Ahuja, Dr. Zoreen Murtaza from Pakistan, and Gunjan and Mehvish, my two artists. And we had hosted this entire conversation amongst all of us about the connectedness of, how Gandharan architectures between both the countries, because Buddhism is spread across the world.
Sorry, what is that? Gandharan?
Gandharan art.
Excuse me, can you please repeat?
Yes. So Gandharan art and architecture is basically related to a lot of Buddhist motifs. Right? We were just talking about Gandharan art and architecture, Buddhism, how it is spread across. Sometimes it is difficult for a country to own a certain religion simply because of an origin point, because at that time when Buddhism was spreading, there was no India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, nothing like that. It just spread. So we were discussing that aspect of architecture. We were discussing, what are the common types of architecture, like Mughal architecture is also spread across so many countries as we know them today. Hamari ye discussion thi. After the panel, there was just light networking, wine and cheese and something. This one gentleman comes towards me, and I was only a moderator in this conversation, and he's like, "Madam, ये आप क्या बोल रही थी स्टेज पे? वो एंटी नेशनल वाला."
वो एंटी नेशनल वाला.
And I'm like, just हम बुद्धिस्ट आर्किटेक्चर की. And I also, not even as a, like I also explained. I explained the whole thing that, you know, we were talking about Gandharan art and architecture. This is what the exhibition is about. I mean, I did that whole explanation. And then he was like, okay. Then he, what about that Taliban in Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Yeah.
I'm like, आप थे audience में? He's like, yes. And obviously, when you do such things, no matter how much conviction you do them with, I was also a little wary because I was like, who's watching this conversation? Who's recording? Who's, you know, like, there's a little bit of that. I told him, listen, obviously, any kind of Taliban anywhere, I'm not in support of that, and nobody is in support of that. Nobody, and we didn't even talk about it.
Huh.
We talked about Afghan carpet weaving. तो
ओवर एक्स्ट्रा पोलिटिसाइज कर देते हैं लोग, सुनना नहीं चाहते.
He was definitely not listening. Now whether over or under is chalo, that is, if I'm doing such a topic, I know I'm prepared.
Right.
But he had not heard he did not listen to us. That I know.
Yeah.
So I was also just a little bit in shock, and I explained that and then he's like, who has maintained heritage sites better? I said, dekhiye. Everyone tries to maintain heritage sites. India and Pakistan especially are trying to maintain their Indus Valley heritage sites as much as they can. But you have to understand that this is not the time to, you know, point fingers and be like, my country is doing better, that one's not doing better. No, this is not that at all, because we need to all maintain these heritage sites. And while we're developing countries, it is difficult to kind of allocate the type of budget to maintenance. So one is not doing better than the other was not even the part of our conversation. Everything he asked me, nothing to do with the conversation we actually had. So I also told him, listen, I gave him the pamphlet. I said, this is the pamphlet, this is the reading list, this is the catalog, aap padhiye. But that's what you get. I mean, if you're dealing with such topics, this is like the thing that you get with trying to deal with topics that you're passionate about and that you're sure about. You also deal with this. That's what it is. So I just kind of improved in terms of what am I very, very convinced about, what can I actually defend to an array of voices. So there was a lot of that. I learned a lot. With this exhibition, I learned a lot. And so much so that even now, we're actually lecturing about the exhibition, showing the 3D map, talking about our research at other universities across the world in their Center for South Asian Studies, etc., etc. And I'm hoping कि भाई कोई Indian universities बुलाएंगी हमें और पाकिस्तानी universities बुलाएंगी हमें बात करने के लिए virtually. But हम University of Michigan में बात कर चुके हैं.
Obviously, people from Indian universities are tuning in right now. You know what to do. Talking about history, Shaleen, मेरे को ऐसा लगता है there's been a whole resurgence of we need to reclaim our history. That tagline, we need to reclaim our history. It's happening in this country. It's happening elsewhere. It's happening in all the countries that were colonized by the UK. And it leads to a few interesting places. Obviously, you have the Unfiltered History Tour that you did with Dentsu web chutney that they made for Vice. And it was a banger, won 12 Cannes Lions. ठीक है, मेरे को तो पता भी नहीं था क्या होते हैं Cannes Lions. I thought like Cannes is the movie वाला Cannes.
मुझे भी नहीं पता था. वो actually मैंने आपके साथ admit भी किया था.
हाँ, correct.
Dentsu की टीम को भी admit किया था कि I couldn't understand what we had won. Because I was a research
कुछ तो अच्छा हो रहा है
लेकिन मेरे को ये नहीं समझ आता कि हम जीते क्या हैं. फिर उन्होंने मुझे बताया कि भाई Cannes Film Festival is this, the Cannes Lions Festival of International Creativity is this. And I was like, oh, there's another.
तो हम नहीं जा रहे फिर South of France.
And no, when we won, that was not anticipated by me. So I didn't even know this existed. So forget anticipation.
Right. Yeah.
12, and for the first time for India, that was a big.
Yeah, huge thing. What I wanted to get at from there is, I saw the website. A couple of things come to mind. Okay. I'm gonna break them down one by one, and then we can go from there. Okay. You can also have your coffee while I do this. एक तो सबसे बड़ा सिर्फ सेंसेशनलिस्टिक मैटर, क्या हम कोहिनूर कभी वापस ला पाएंगे शालीन? एक, ठीक है. दूसरा, there's a lot of talk about repatriation that emerged. Repatriation मतलब roughly I don't know, you can explain it better, right, when you talk about it.
Yeah, of course.
Repatriation की बातचीत है. The third thing is when you start looking at the British Museum or any museum in the world that is run by colonial power or not, there is a guarantee कि कुछ ना कुछ सामान तो लूट के आया ही आया होगा, right? किसी ने अब where do you draw the line and how did this conversation even start? Because it's happening all across the world. When I watched the tidbits from the documentary on the website, Egypt वाले historian कह रहे हैं भाई साहब इन्होंने हमारा ये ले लिया, ठीक है. कोई और वियतनाम में कुछ और कह रहा है, इंडिया के कुछ और कह रहे हैं. मतलब बहुत सारे लोग कह रहे हैं कि that different म्यूजियम्स ने हमारा सामान चुरा लिया, right? But then what's the solution? Like just a conversation? किया तो क्या किया जाए?
किया तो क्या किया जाए? One, I'll just explain the tour and just kind of segregate the tour from how I start answering these questions.
Okay.
See, the Unfiltered History Tour was also to create something that the masses, and especially the present-day British audience, the younger ones especially, could tap into. See, because the indigenous countries, Vietnam was not on the list, I just have to say that.
I know. वो मैंने realize कर लिया था बोलते हुए.
Sorry, yeah. So, for example, the audiences in Egypt, the audiences in Iraq, in India for that matter, the audiences in Nigeria for that matter. See, they are well versed with the fact that, okay, this is, whoever wants to be, is well versed with the fact that, okay, this is not in our country, this is over there. Okay. The British audiences know very little about that. So this was also targeted there. And it worked. And when I say it worked, is that we have enough statistics about, how many times there were social impressions with the YouTube videos, with the podcasts, with the type of engagement with the augmented reality filters. मतलब वो सारा हो गया. ये एक इसको जो करना था, इसने actually वो कर दिया. Interestingly, when you talk about decolonization, now the thing is, decolonization is a lot more recognized now. It is an underground movement in many countries that were part of a lot of imperial empire building, which also means that along with the UK, with England for that matter, there was also France, there was also Germany, which had also colonized a lot more spaces. Even earlier than that, there was also the Netherlands, for example, also colonized a lot more spaces, Portugal for that matter. Now the thing is, what happens with colonization is there's also part of that community within that country. So it is also the African-led historians, citizen activists in Germany that are leading the biggest decolonization underground movement as well, making sure these conversations reach where they need to. Sometimes it's maybe important and it works when people take these conversations, not just academics, not just government officials. It's sometimes very important for the people to do it. When we talk about India,
yeah,
I have particularly said this about the British Museum, and I have to repeat it again because it is just as shocking every single time. When I was studying in London, I also tried to understand this from the British Museum. There only I would go and conduct interviews and also try and understand.
With the staff and gallerists there?
With the staff, with the heads of department. That was also part of all of the essays that I would write and everything. So it, as any other researcher, you have to go and also do a lot of in-person interviews. So I'm also speaking with a lot of these heads of department. This is old white gentleman. I also asked him, ki bhai, in English, I said that, do you think that any of these artifacts would ever return? And he just couldn't understand what I was saying because he was like, where will they return? I said, to the country of origin, India. There's so many Indian artifacts over here. He said, no, that can't happen. The British Museum will become empty that way. And I'm like, yeah. So one is that there is that, but this was a conversation that was in 2012. Cut to 2022. The tone around this conversation is a lot more different. That's something that I'm happy to witness. Because when I was talking about all of this in 2012, 2013, 2014, there were not a lot of takers. Now when I'm talking about the same thing, I'm still talking about the same thing, the audience shift in reclaiming a certain history is there. Now the thing is, what and which history? I'm only concerned about colonial history because that is the history that I know a little bit more about. Reclaiming history can go all the way back to Indus, pre-Indus and everything, and those are not my areas. That is where I don't know enough to commentate, but colonial history I can talk like a lot about. And I can say, when it comes to the Kohinoor, it is very difficult. It is difficult for multiple reasons. It is difficult for legal reasons. It is difficult for political reasons. It is difficult for socio-cultural reasons. But what my argument has always been is Kohinoor was not the only thing that had been looted or taken from India, please.
What are some other things?
1857 की जब mutiny हुई थी, the Delhi Palace, the Awadh Palace, Lucknow में, वो palace complete. I mean, they were resplendent, especially the Lucknowi wealth was a lot associated with the palace, inside the palace. I mean, all of that was just taken top to bottom, everything.
Including the palace? Just the palace was left? Just
the palace was left, but even, for example, there was a lot of like precious stone work, semi-precious stone work done. They were all gouged out. Utne level tak ka. Shawls were burned to take the gold thread, silver thread in it and everything. See, that is how thorough it was. Now the thing is, with this, I think maybe our mistake or maybe our misunderstanding happens when we talk about the fact that all this was looted from India.
Sorry, just one more question on that.
Go for it.
Was this an organized effort, and who did it?
Tough. It was organized in the sense that taking war booty or looting from plunder, which happens in a war, was unfortunately very normalized when it came to naval warfare. Naval warfare में इतना normalized हो गया था 1700s, 1800s उससे पहले भी, कि अब वो land की warfare है उसमें भी normalize होने लगा. ठीक है कि ये war effort हुआ है, war effort का return क्या है कि जो सामान जो हारा है उसका सारा सामान ले लेने का. This is a known understanding that was just happening 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries where we are concerned. हम उसकी बात कर रहे हैं अभी. When you say organized, see, the thing is, who to blame sometimes gets easier when you just say, okay, yeah, UK. But UK was doing nothing different than what other countries were doing. They were all doing the same thing. Germany has also been part of, almost finishing tribal wealth and certain tribes in Africa. France has been responsible for a lot of colonial crimes as well when it comes to, for example, Algiers, another country around it. Now when we go back to Britain, see, India is the country that we know of from 1947. When we're talking about British India, we're talking about India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, parts of Myanmar, we're talking about Sri Lanka. We're talking about British India, that huge...
The subcontinent.
Yes, we're talking about all of it. So that makes repatriation very difficult because आएगा तो कहाँ आएगा? अब तो 5 claimants हो गए. पहले वो एक problem है, legal problem.
अच्छा, और लोग भी बोलते हैं कोहिनूर के बारे में हमारा है?
To an extent, others can say it. So that, but फिर हम origin story पे आ जाते, अरे गोलकुंडा के माइन से आया तो वो तो हमारा है. फिर दूसरी problem, क्योंकि कोहिनूर at some point was also part of the kingdom of Punjab. And guess where is Punjab? It is between Pakistan and India.
All right.
अब बेचारे रंजीत सिंह ने अपनी विल में भी लिखा था कि जगन्नाथपुरी के टेंपल में दे देंगे, तो वहाँ से भी आता है क्लेम कि अरे हमें दो. तो ये भी क्लेम्स हैं. Sikh kingdom and its descendants.
Right.
अरे हमें दो, दुलीप सिंह के तो हम वंशज हैं, हमें दो. Then there is official claim. See, an official claim is very different. You have to actually file something with UNESCO in its cultural property return form and everything. One huge problem globally that is there is that there is a lot more care and concern around World War II and what happened after that in terms of the loot from the Nazis. The looting done by the Nazis, repatriation efforts to the Jews are a lot more institutionalized and proper and organized. The word organized.
Because the state accepted that they did wrong, right?
The state accepted that they did wrong and the Jews got global support. Right? And please let me make one thing very clear. Germany lost. When you lose, you also have a lot less international power.
Right.
Guess who has been winning so far? Britain. उस पे कितना international pressure है? उतना बन नहीं सकता ना. A losing country.
No, it's the one that makes the pressure.
Obviously, right? Now, when it comes to this, UNESCO has made actually very, very competent laws around repatriation of Nazi loot, repatriation of state-based looting, which is the idea of the state कि ये nation है, इसके पास वापस आना है. वो तो अभी हो रहा है ना, वो तो last 50, 60, 70 years में हो रहा है. Colonial times का क्या? इसका कोई जिक्र नहीं है यूनेस्को में कि प्री स्टेट कॉलोनाइजेशन टाइम की लूटिंग का कोई स्ट्रक्चर ही नहीं है कि इस चीज़ को भी हमें उतनी इंपॉर्टेंस देनी है. वेयर एज जो कॉलोनाइज टाइम की लूटिंग है दैट इज़ 300-400 years. वर्ल्ड वॉर 2 की क्या लूटिंग, वो तो few
6 years 39 to 45
maybe a decade, like let's stretch it to a decade because the looting doesn't happen just when the act of war is there. It happens after that for a long time as well because artifacts keep circulating in many different primary and secondary markets. अब मैं थी ब्रिटेन में जब मैं ये ऑक्शन हाउस रिकॉर्ड्स पढ़ रही थी, म्यूजियम्स में जा रही थी, नॉट जस्ट ब्रिटिश म्यूजियम, द रॉयल इंजीनियर्स मेस इन कैंट. I would keep going to soldiers museums as well, museums which highlighted soldiers, which highlighted military history. सब तो वहाँ पढ़ा है. Swords, especially all of the swords that were used by those that were involved in the mutiny, because one of the ways to show that the victor is powerful is you take the person who lost, you take their weapons. That is the biggest show of power, right? That. So a lot of the things that you'd find in local British museums will be swords, muskets, guns. You will also find, for example, in Christie's auction records from 1857 onwards, Delhi Palace में ऐसी जेड की डिश, लखनऊ पैलेस की ये किताब, मतलब ये सारी चीज़ें
ऑक्शन हो रही थी वहाँ पे.
हाँ, क्योंकि वो आ गई ना यहाँ से यहाँ.
And I'm sure the swords from the mutiny must be very valuable to the descendants of the people who were involved.
Value, but how? Sometimes these things don't have monetary value, but they have an emotional value of
course, like heirlooms.
Yeah.
You know?
Now the thing is, म्यूजियम में बस गया तो वहाँ प्रॉब्लम. लेकिन जब प्राइवेटली किसी के हाथ में होता है ना, वहाँ से रिपैट्रिएशन ज़्यादा आसान होता है. इसीलिए हमें बनाना है इंटरनेशनल प्रेशर. Private hands can be pressured to return because the descendants of all these people may or may not think the same way like their grandfathers did. These are our contemporaries. They may think differently about colonization than their grandfathers did who were part of colonizing.
Right. They were a product of their times.
Yeah.
They're a product of their times.
Yes, exactly. Which is why sometimes I find that changing international public opinion is one of the best ways to kind of create pressure, create a lobby for the academics, for the people in the government to actually, change some of their policies around repatriation and around reparations, which is to kind of also give subsequent money for the same, which Dr. Shashi Tharoor talks about quite a bit. So one is that you take all of this, make someone feel bad because they've lost, and, it starts circulating. The other is ghamand. Oh, because I would sit and read the diaries of these British officers. There was one British officer called Hudson. Bahadur Shah Safar ke jo bete the, they were also trying to fight only, but bechare they all lost, right? He took all their swords and presented it to the queen because the last from the house of the Taimur, which is what he's written, should be given. He called them rascally princes. I mean, he's written really badly about them. So one is that, you want this symbol of how we defeated them to kind of somewhere end up in the royal collection. It's there. There's also Bahadur Shah Zafar's crown, which is not here. It is there in Britain, which gets displayed in one or the other exhibition all the time. So one is that. You have the sign of power of who you kind of destroyed in another country. That's how you create a signal, right? There was also, for example, some of the swords that were actually taken from Lucknow into Bengal, and they were actually displayed at the Victoria Museum in Australia. Australia was another younger colony of the UK. Now, the lesson they wanted to send to the Aboriginals, by the way, the Australian Aboriginals, was that this is what we did to the people that rebelled in India. This can happen to you also.
So there was a similar rebellion happening at the same time?
See, the Aboriginals of Australia they were the indigenous
of course.
People that used to live over there. And when any country then gets, any nation or any space, region that gets colonized. So when Australia was being colonized, obviously there was histories of friction between who was colonizing and who was being colonized, which are the Aboriginals. And land ke upar, lots of very, very, very bad treatments in terms of how to take land away from the Aboriginals. So all that was also happening. But Australia was a younger colony. Nahi thi. India was a sophisticated colony that had been there for so long. So in Museum Victoria, main staircase पे सारे जो British Indian mutineers के जो भी थे war weapons वो ऐसे डिस्प्ले किए थे ताकि जब तुम अंदर आओ तुम एक बार ये पढ़ लो मतलब कि ये हुआ था. Now the messaging is not just to the Aboriginals over there, the messaging is to the rest of the British officers over there and just the rest of the general people over there that okay, this is what we did to them, so don't even try. So you use all of these things to create all of this mess that happens in the late 1800s. Now my problem is, we have a lot more problems beyond getting all these objects back. That is a whole other debate. But the decolonization that is important is here.
In the mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's the decolonization of knowledge and the decolonization of ideas. Decolonization of knowledge means that a lot of what is written about Indian history, especially during this time, who was writing it? The British were writing it. The British have written our history for a very, very long time. And I'm not saying this with some sense of nationalist fervor. I'm saying it with some sense of ownership. That beyond what the British wrote about us, there are many, many narratives that we need to consider of every single vantage point of whoever occupied the Indian subcontinent. And that is the history we need to write and read.
So you mean multiple perspectives, anywhere from agar like a state was ruled by one kingdom for 200 years, account for that, account for what your grandfather says, account for what your neighbor says, account for all the migrant communities, like you're saying like a very...
Account for what the poets are saying, because the poets don't say, they sing. Account for what the women are saying, because they are never written in history. They're never written about in history. Account for what lower classes and lower castes were ever saying, because they are still not accounted in history. Look at the Dalit perspective, look at the queer perspective. These are the perspectives that will never get written into history. That's also very important content.
So then it becomes very complex, right?
Of course. But
like,
history is complex. It should always be complex. It should not be simple and it should not be linear. That is the mistake we make. Because history is never linear.
I love that. Because it's very easy, right? One line of thought that is written down in books and then propagated because it helps people in power or whatever, right? And then some people's lived realities just get ignored because they just didn't have... Like I was watching this show called The House of Dragon, the new Game of Thrones spin-off yesterday night.
Yeah.
But what is very interesting is because I took a history class in college with this professor called Professor Betty Anderson. She is a masterful academic when it concerns media revolutions in the Middle East. That's her specialty. So she covers like how media and the Middle East intersect. After the Arab Spring or usse pehle bhi. I've taken multiple classes with her in college.
Amazing.
So she would often talk about कि जो ये जितने भी palaces हैं या जितने भी inscriptions आप देखते हो दुनिया भर के अंदर कहीं पे भी, they're all the history that you know from these things are because kings or queens could afford to have those written. But जिसके पास पैसे नहीं थे, जिसके पास power नहीं थी, वो नहीं कर पाया. इसलिए poets were also commissioned to write nice things, right? But then there are other histories, but we don't know about them because they were not written down. So there is that angle as well. And now on the show, this guy is like suffering from something. Good problem, Oriosko, and he's asking his advisor, full in his vanity, will I be remembered as a good king? Will they sing songs about me in 100 years, 500 years? और मैंने कहा वही जो एक टिपिकल राजा वाला गुरूर जो चाहते हैं, जैसे वो ऑजी मैंडियस की पोएम है ना, आई थिंक दैट्स कि मेरे बारे में कुछ लिख दिया जाए ताकि मैं प्रिजर्व हो जाऊँ. दैट सेम थॉट इज मेंशन देयर. बट व्हाट अबाउट द हिस्ट्री ऑफ द पॉपुलस? It could be uninteresting, but it's certainly a history.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that the revision that we need in not just the main Indian curriculum, but like all types of curriculum that are taught about this part of the world, in other parts of the world and in this part of the world, is that who has written that, why have they written that, and who commissioned them to write it, even today. That's why you have to read multiple vantage points even today beyond the textbooks that are prescribed for you to read.
Is there a routine that people can follow which would sort of help?
A routine?
So for example, let's say we've got a book in the background that I haven't read, The Anarchy by William Dalrymple. It's a fat book. And you mentioned that because he's not from here, although he's lived here.
He's lived here.
Yeah, he's lived here. Fir bhi, matlab that is one perspective. Then maybe...
It's one perspective.
Maybe people could benefit from, say, reading the accounts of one of the soldiers who lived here, who's actually an Indian.
Actually, an Indian is the questionable part, but someone who's from this region, a soldier at that very time that he's writing about this book, it would be beneficial to read the soldier's perspective. It would be beneficial to read the mercenaries' perspective. Because the thing is, who were in these British Indian armies? Yes, they were the sepoys, they were the cavalry and the infantry and all of that. But they were also, after a certain point, they had to hire people to be in the army. Not just train people with the idea of being in the army, but they had
just
to
maintain numbers.
Yeah, maintain numbers. So, sometimes they were prisoners from London that were hired into the army. Sometimes they were Sikhs, they were Gurkhas. Yeah, these were also parts of multiple armies at the time. Because mercenaries were also how you made your numbers work.
Right.
Whichever side, regardless of who's fighting whom. But that's how you kind of also make your numbers. Read all those perspectives. It would because the soldier isn't just like one collective voice. I mean, there are many. Maybe also then read the historian that is writing about the many, because reading each of them, as you said, is there a formula? Is there a way to do this? So one is that, try and find someone who's writing about all of that. I think language becomes a problem. We're conversant in English, which is why this is accessible to us. Are the same things written in Hindi? Are the same things written in Marathi, in Gujarati? Are they? I also don't know. I don't know. But I think that is what kind of keeps from an idea around this to be built, rebuilt and unbuilt. Because certain things only will be written in English.
Yeah. Don't you think that So I was reading Munshi Premchand actually.
Yes, you told me, yeah.
Wow, I've told you a lot of things over this conversation. And what struck me is that it's from my grandmother's era, right?
Yes.
It's all those books. He's very critical of a few people, but it's just that uska ek snapshot nahi ban sakta Instagram pe dalne ke liye. Like it isn't very rewarding to say, read a Munshi Premchand book and put it up on Instagram, because even you won't even get like bad indie cred. It's just so dated. But it's a very honest critique of Indian society उस time पे क्या चल रहा है.
Absolutely.
What I don't understand about decolonialism is that sure हम colonial mindset के अंदर रह सकते हैं. We have a lot of the colonial hangover, right? Right, all of that. Does that not also help us? Like, does our subcontinent have the history of logic and critical thinking that maybe was enhanced by the British? Nahi?
There were ways of learning that were already very much prevalent within the Indian subcontinent in different regions. The thing is, the idea of a organized curriculum, giving exams, was also something that was partly institutionalized by the British within the Indian subcontinent, because to become part of the civil services, you needed to pass a certain... exam, right? So a lot of that curriculum building happens from the British understanding of what needs to be taught. We had like a certain, and when I say we, I'm still talking about this region. There was a certain type of a Gurukul system of
apprenticeship.
learning. Yeah, there was a lot of that. There were a lot of guilds where a lot of practical skills were taught, even before Mughal times, for a long time. So one is that there's a lot of this curriculum building and a lot of this understanding around exams, classification, record keeping, a lot of that. Building museums, a lot of that comes from still a very, very British understanding of how things need to be seen, dissected, learnt and taught. I'm not saying this is not, all of that is bad, remove that and do something else. No, but it is in that structure. What are we being taught and how are we being taught that? That needs to always be questioned. Parts of the Indian Penal Code are still written by the British. They're very, very old. Case in point, the decriminalization of homosexuality was extremely important. It's a British law. Something like that. So there are a lot of systems of governance in multiple parts of the society that we lead in today that were brought in very much from a British understanding of how to rule. But when you move to self-governance, I think it is important to question that these systems were set in place to privilege a certain type of person. But as much as we have whole conversation, the debates about secularism and diversity, but we are way more diverse than whatever this system is created for. So I think that needs to be re-understood a little bit. Whether that is curriculum, exams, whether that is institutions of governance, whether that is institutions of justice, a lot of that was established pre-1947. And who established that and why? That should always be something we should always be thinking about. And that is critical thinking. It's nothing to do with history. That's just like critical thinking. And I think when you say, where is the formula to, do all of this? I think it is also in our teachers. The formula is in the person that is teaching you. Not just the books that you may or may not read. Because everyone doesn't have equal access to books. But we have the RTE, so we have some amount of teaching happening from the stratification of India from the top to the bottom. It's also in the teacher. And I mean, I was inspired by my own set of history teachers that has got me to this point. And I think that the true challenges of teaching are to be able to keep yourself nimble by trying to teach in spaces where everything that you know is not being taught. I mean, I told you, I love teaching history in places where history is not being taught. That is where it is needed the most. Design colleges, technology colleges, that's kind of where it's...
But also rural India, which is where you've also taught.
Which is where we have... So my father started schools for first generation learners of agricultural labor within the middle of Madhya Pradesh. And I'm from Madhya Pradesh. So what I saw was that there's this huge conviction that my father had for education. Because he was a gentleman farmer, had sugar mills, working with sugar cane. And for him, what was very important is that all the farmers that he worked with, their children should have another level of opportunity than what their parents had. So that's why he started those schools. And he started those schools in the 80s. And this is Sihor. And at that time, there were no schools then. He started the first school. Then we expanded from Sihor to Ichhawar and Shampur. And in those schools over there, the school that we started, Sharda Vidya Mandir, was also one of the first ones to get CBSE accreditation in that region. Which was a big deal. Because otherwise you were under a state board and curriculums differ basis the board that you have. I think, to me, I can also teach in all of these premier colleges. And I do have guest lectureships in Lady Shri Ram College. I do visit Ashoka sometimes as well, Ashoka University as well. And then there's this. This is the grounding aspect of trying to understand that I can have all of these high concepts that we're talking about, decolonization, and, we're talking so much about, specifics of cultural repatriation. All that is great. But I think that if I can't explain that or a version of that to my students in Sihor or to the teachers that are teaching those students in Sihor, then kind of what is the point of all of this knowledge that I have, which is my understanding of teaching. That I also have to, I want to be able to do that. So there is a lot of that where these students come from. And they're the first people being educated in their families, and mostly we're surrounded by second or third generation learners. That makes a huge difference. And over there, we're talking about seasonal differences in fee payment. We're talking, because basis the season, whether the family will have money or not to pay the fees, and then you need to keep subsisting that throughout. We're talking about lack of electricity in some of the schools. So you have to figure out how to just keep electricity going on over there. I mean, these are administrative issues as well of education, which preclude
just
actual
basic
teaching.
Padhai, huh?
Yeah, padhai to tabhi ho when there is electricity. Basic electricity. I'm not talking about some fancy AC. No,
Central AC, 32 rooms.
I know, right? No, I'm just talking about a basic light chalni chahiye wahan pe. We're talking about when the fields grow too high around the school, we have to figure out a way to chop them. Otherwise, in the rains, a lot of animals keep coming in and everything. So then there'll be like snakes in the classroom. I mean, this is some whole other thing that we're dealing with.
And you'd go there yourself?
I go there almost like 2019, pre-COVID. I would go there almost every month to deal with the administrative part. I must confess, I was much better as a teacher than dealing with the administrative part. So this year, I've been going for training with the teachers.
Okay.
So I've shifted gears.
Wow.
And that I think keeps me very, very real. Because these are not students that are understanding me in English. I have to speak in English and Hindi with equal prowess. And speak about not some great historiography, but like just basic Indian independence through this.
So take me to a classroom, for example, and for all classes, 1st to 12th?
Yeah, we have K-12 over there.
K-12?
In the main CBSE accredited school, Ichhawar and Shampur have till class 8.
Okay.
And growing.
Okay, so let's take us to the, क्योंकि मेरे को भी काफी समय हो गया graduate हुए school से, and you as well, right? Let's take a 6th class history. When does history start roughly? 5th? We study history throughout. But let's go with 6th grade history. Chalo. Right. 6th grade history, right?
Social science.
Social science, yes. You start there. Now, what will a teacher typically teach? ये किताब के अंदर लिखा हुआ है कि social science का मतलब होता है social चीज़ों के बारे में science, something like that, right? And then it goes from there.
We actually all start with the Indus Valley civilization.
Yeah?
Yeah. We start with that. We also start with basically biological evolution, which means we start with the evolution of the human body, Homo habilis, Homo erectus,
In social science?
Yeah. In social science, caves में कैसे रहते थे वगैरह वगैरह. Where in the level of detail that a 6th grader will understand.
Yeah.
Up until Indus Valley, so on and so forth, and then that keeps going. You have Guptas, Mauryas, so on and so on and so on. We just keep going. I think what I would do in those classes would be to just ask the student, what have you not understood in life about history, इतिहास क्या नहीं समझ आता बताओ मुझे. And whether that question ranges from क्यों पढ़ना है ये, हमें क्यों पढ़ना है, ये मुझे नहीं पढ़ना है.
क्यों पढ़ना है वैसे? मैं खुद जानना चाहता हूँ. मैं तो हिस्ट्री टॉप मारता था. आई यूज्ड टू लव हिस्ट्री. ठीक है, स्टिल डू.
Then?
But as an independent researcher, I love it more. In school, I didn't like it that much. I liked कि मैं विकीपीडिया में बैठ के ना किसी चीज़ का इतिहास खुद पढ़ रहा हूँ. वो वाली जो चीज़ थी ना, that skill was far more. I enjoyed it because I had autonomy over it, right? And I mean, I have my own answer, but why do you think is there a need? क्योंकि लोग बोलते हैं ये सब तो like the classic straw man argument is like they're all dead. What's the point? Like yeah, ये सारी बातें, right?
I agree. Also, Wikipedia. Just be careful what you read on Wikipedia. But in addition to that,
it's a good start though for someone who's interested. I mean, as a researcher, you would shit on it because you would not even look at Google Scholar with the same.
had to reframe this, because one is, yes, I can control a lot about what I say in my schools in Sihor, Ichhar, Shampur, where like I'll work with the students till they get interested, etc., and I'll talk in a certain way, etc., and I'll just let them lead the class, which is the only way that can happen. But these modern research methods of Google Scholar versus Wikipedia, I had to change my complete strategy about teaching in an English medium college, which is MITID in Pune. In 2018, for the first time, I had gone to teach history to master's students.
Of design?
Of design management, which means that, one, they're of varying ages. They're all in their early to late 20s. I was in my late 20s. I never let my age be out. And they've come from different fields. They've also come from commerce, UI, UX. They've come from interior design, jewelry design, leather and accessory design. They've come from everywhere. And they stopped studying anything to do with social sciences, humanities, whatever, in class
school.
10. Class 10. Because they never took those streams and all after that. So they stopped in class 10.
But if they're design students, they must have either taken non-med or humanities?
Also commerce, right? Yeah. So the last time a history book was opened by anybody was in class 10. And I would ask them, कि कोई एक बोल देगा नहीं class 12? No, class 10. So I'd be like, okay. I would send out a survey form before the class begins. 1-2 weeks in advance, I'd say, listen, you tell me what you want to study. And I'd put it in a different way, right? I would say that because I'm teaching big history, what Yuval Harari talks about when it comes to macro history, which is taking a lot of data about history and trying to create certain patterns to understand moments in history. I'm trying to do that for South Asia, right? And that is the only way that it can be taught for people who don't want to learn or may be very intimidated by learning. And I connect them with future statistics. So I teach history and the future, which means that if I'm talking about the history of food, of nutrition, I'm also going to talk about the future of food, which is food scarcity statistics globally and regionally. The only way that I can make this interesting, I can keep talking about the past, but if I don't create a relatability for the future, I'll also lose that master's student's interest. One is that, for example, when I talk about the history of the world, in that context, I talk about how the world got populated. Then I talk about overpopulation crisis. When I talk about, for example, we talk a lot about the history of housing and settlement, how people live. It's very interesting aspects for a design student to understand. But then we also talk about the future of the housing crisis. Where are the spaces to live now? So what I do is I talk about the world from the Big Bang on a historical timeline. But what we also try and push to is 2100 and 2050. Because 2050 is the world that my students are going to inherit. They need to know the problems that are coming over there are also something connected with the past. I mean, we talk about climate all the way from wherever I can get like the earliest resource up until now. And then we talk about the degree of change of the Earth's temperature up until the future.
Do you relate it to design? Do you relate it to like a master's student?
I relate it to the designer in them and how they are going to be designing for their consumer, and these are the problems they're going to inherit.
Interesting. कि अगर food scarcity and someone's a food designer, you should think about
कुछ UI UX का कोई भी हो, सोचो ना भाई ये सब problems कहीं नहीं जा रही है. Inclusivity in the office, queer rights, they're not going anywhere. Minority and their problems, they're not going anywhere. And you had all of these types of, you had different graveyards for people within the Harappan civilization who were suffering from either certain types of leprosy or incurable diseases. You had this there also. And you have a certain type of stratification in India that is suffering differently now also. These are problems that are not going anywhere, but please understand there's a historical context to all of these problems. And you're inheriting them. This is where they're also coming from. So I just make them better problem solvers by telling them a lot of context about the problem. बाकी कुछ कर ही नहीं सकती मैं और इसमें. So I try to do that. And you love reading, right? So if I tell you to read something, you will at least try to read it. My students, they don't want to read because they've never been taught to read. They also very honestly also explained to me that we've not been taught to read long form, which means they can't read long articles, long texts. मैंने तो पूरी ऐसी bibliography दी थी with books in them. And second day of my course, they said that listen, ma'am, please, ये नहीं हो, हम इतना पढ़ते ही नहीं हैं. And not because we don't want to, but we've just not gotten the skill of reading this much at length.
And it's a skill, you would say it's something you have to be taught. It doesn't
it's something
just come
that
from
has
interest.
To be habituated from an early age. And I think that because now...
But it's fixable now.
Modes of information have changed, which is why long form reading may be compromised, but then you have podcasts. Where are we at? Certain podcasts. You would have certain types of video format learning as well, which is, as you know, very much educating much of the world. You have Coursera at a time when you didn't. So you have multiple formats now, which you didn't have earlier.
But long form reading kept name was it?
Long form reading develops a different type of student where they contend with their attention span. They need to have the attention span. They need to be able to critically analyze what they are reading. They need to question why they are reading what they are reading and who's written that. I think that happens when you're reading, not when you're listening, which is also important, not when you're watching, which is also important.
And when you're not skimming, that's another thing.
When you're not skimming, exactly. So when they said that this much we can't read, please meet us halfway. I went back to the faculty housing and I changed the entire assignment structure because I had given them essays. I am coming from my own academic humanities. I was like, essays, 5 essays to karne hi hai. And they said that I had to understand that just because a student can't write essays doesn't mean that there is no other skill over there. There is a lot more skill.
Oh, it's critical thinking to the finest. I was a good student India-wise. I would use clever adjectives, but for the life of me, I could not write critically. And in college, in the first year, I was so shocked because they put me in an ESL class, English as a second language, which hurt me, right? But then it's like, oh, it's not about the words, it's how you argue about things. Writing a paper is a skill.
Yes.
And then I petitioned and got back because I realized, okay, I'm not even thinking about, this is my claim, these are my central arguments, this is a counter argument, if at all, this is my end. Pata hi nahi tha ye sab.
This is the moment for my truth. I was also sent for a writing course.
Let's go.
At SOAS.
Okay.
Now the thing is, School of Oriental African Studies is one of the best ranked art history courses in the world. And in LSR, I used to score well. Towards the end of my time in LSR, I was scoring very well. And I was like, I know everything. Mujhe hi pata hai. Sara Russian history, I know everything. Because I've got so many marks, I know everything.
Right.
First essay I submitted at SOAS. And I was 21. I was also the youngest noob over there simply because everybody came with a lot more experience and a lot more know-how. And the professor sent it back saying that, listen, if I grade this, I'll have to fail you. I thought किसी और की बात कर रहे कि मेरा तो हो ही नहीं सकता. He's like, you've not understood the mandate of the assignment. You've not understood it.
Yeah.
And you have to take some remedial classes. गई मैं remedial class. Same conclusion that, oh, I have to do this. Cut to teaching my students, 2018, I realized that, okay, 5 essays was maybe my missed ye meri galti thi. I made that one essay, but I still continued with 5 assignments where I changed the assignment completely, which meant that we go to a museum with me. We understand historical context of objects. They create a business pitch around that object and sell it to me. Understanding a market.
Because they're going to be in the field doing the same thing. Some of them might become product designers.
Yes.
Very smart, Shaleen.
See, I re-engineered an auction where they pick up any everyday object that they like, create a history around that, get it approved by me, and they sell the object to the class, and the class bids for it by raising their hands in terms of the kind of ideas they have about how they want to mutilate the object, change it, change the color, change the size, change the use case, change the material, and use that for something that they are arguing for. I realized that if I change my assignments, but I kept the mandate the same, that you have to argue critically, you have to think holistically, you have to think about who's not on the table. All यही है ना मेरा पढ़ाना तो मुझे यही सब था. Historically, how do you contextualize something? They got there. It was just not in what my preconceived idea that it
Right.
was be through essays.
Yeah.
लिखा उन्होंने एक ऐसे,
Huh.
काफ़ी ठीक लिखा, ठीक है, हो गया. वो एक ऐसे बच्चा सबने लिखा. Class presentations, they did debates. I gave them the entire history and future about the Kohinoor debate, and they would debate that in class for and against. I just had to see that.
I would love to be a student in your class.
Okay, good. We can make that happen.
For sure. No, it's just stuff like that. I think people, when they acquire too many degrees, they kind of are unable to unlearn their training. And
Like me, I
yeah.
agree. That this is, you've described me. Up until a few years ago, this was me.
Because वो design students के लिए कितना valuable है. Like that thing where they can sell stuff. They have to sell stuff. Even if they're not someone who like public savvy, they have to do that at some point, right? Even on a Zoom call, if they're working in a team, in a startup, which is very common, right? And then the whole bidding part. I think going to museums, physically seeing stuff is also very important. I have a friend, Ansh Mehra. He's a product designer.
Who I got to know about from your podcast.
Yeah, so he told me something very interesting. He's like, I do not hang out with I do not hang out with product designers at all. Instead, I go to physical places and see how products are placed, right? And I spend almost all my time with other industry folks, so I understand how they think. And he's a great guy at what he does. I mean,
Interesting.
there is merit to hang out with the same people in your field. In the same way, I could say I don't do the same with all other podcasters, because what will you really talk about? It's better to like just arrive at like how things will be done in a real world sense, right? And वैसे भी it's cool. I think that maybe your art walk and all of that history really helps. If you were just an armchair academic, maybe you would just keep imposing that for a long time.
Maybe, but we'll never know. Maybe we'll never know.
Yeah.
And I find that one is teaching history to history students. That is a joy in and of itself. They are eager, they are hungry, they question me so much, and I love that. The other is teaching history in places where it's not taught, which is, for example, the MIT Design Management Department, which is, for example, and next week, as you know, I'm going to teach at Somaya Vidya Vihar to their design students, their first years, who I've never taught. I've only taught people in their late 20s. I've never taught 18-year-olds. So that is a whole other level of questioning, because they should, basis the credit and marks of their entire grading system, value what I have to teach, but they are not internally primed to value it like a history student would be.
Right.
But that is the challenge. That is the point. That is kind of the point, that if I can make them just see overarchingly at least that this is the value of learning anything about our past. Like history is, again, that's a discipline, but anything about our past, this is the value of learning it. That's much more difficult to arrive at and much more valuable for me, because that's where the rest of the world is now. The people who love history are this,
right,
which they will love now.
Enthusiasts तो आ ही जाएंगे.
मैं पढ़ाऊँ ना पढ़ाऊँ वो तो हैं.
Yeah.
But this is where I refine my own skill of teaching, of learning from them, so I can teach better. So that's like, this is my joy.
About the idea of Delhi and about the future of Delhi. ठीक है?
Yes.
We were at dinner and you mentioned something. Just say, okay, the AQI levels are through the roof, right? People who are buying real estate, they are still buying more, right? Building more stuff, right? And this is a landlocked place. We have some of the worst pollution levels in the world. I think my own city, Faridabad, is number 6 now. It used to be number 1 in terms of pollution levels in the world, which is a lot. Kanpur has beaten us. So
I think
that's not a valid statistic.
No, they don't be proud of over there.
No, just like, I mean, one has to have a little dark humor about these things to lead their lives. It's not, my point is you mention जैसे वो history और future को साथ जोड़ने वाली बात है, contextualizing it, right? It's one thing to say कि, you know, I've read the history of Delhi, very fascinating. You know, Chandni Chowk has this origin story, Lal Killa has this, blah, 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 all of that. Wonderful. You mentioned something about Sundar Nursery and that place, how people will slowly collaborate around that, slowly like congregate around that. Where is the future of Delhi heading in terms of a strictly architectural standpoint? And then we can segue into cities of Delhi. Like the इतिहास of Delhi कि जिसमें there are extinct cities beyond just Shahjahanabad or some other cities.
Sure. I think that this is something that I have also learned from my colleague. His name is Akash Chattopadhyay. It's him and I that are developing cities of Delhi, and we thought a lot about this. हमें क्या अच्छा लगता है दिल्ली के बारे में, उसका इतिहास हमें अच्छा लगता है. That is there. You are right. We do love it. But I think the most important thing to understand is that we keep talking about Lutyens Delhi. That's kind of where we understand.
Love Lutyens Delhi.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot to love about all these versions of Delhi. There are these 7 or 8 cities of Delhi. It's at least a कुछ एक कहा सुना है ना, अच्छा 7 cities of Delhi सुनते तो हैं.
हाँ, definition के अंदर भी city और city के अंदर city.
उतना तो हमने सुना है ना कहीं पे.
हाँ.
Now, our argument as historical researchers is that उसके बाद क्या? After this 8th city, was there no Delhi? Of course, there were many Delhis after that. And we wanted to keep pushing that. कितनी और Delhis आई हैं उनके बाद? After Lutyens Delhi, you have pre-independence वाली Delhi. Then you have the Delhi that kind of, started becoming the national capital after independence. New understanding of self-determination. Then you have the Delhi that kind of boomed when it came to cottage industries. How do you look at that through CP? Then you keep moving a little bit forward. You start looking at what was happening post Indira when also Manmohan started opening up the economy. What did all these brands do to the newer settlements that started coming in Delhi? When did South Delhi become a thing? There were areas where it was considered a certain privilege address. That privilege address changes. Why? How?
तेरे को पता है इसका जोरबाग में घर है.
Exactly. So when all that changes, how does all that change? Because every city that we study is part of triple C's. It is a city, it is a citadel where decisions take place, and it is a congregation where people congregate around it. This is also something that Akash and I are also always thinking and talking about. Now we also pushed it to what is the future of Delhi? What does it look like? See, there is pollution, there's issues with greenery, there is the peri-urban Delhi, there is,
Sorry, the what? The peri-urban Delhi?
Yeah, little between the urban and rural, what exists?
Acha. Periphery urban.
And then you keep moving further and further and you understand that there is Delhi NCR also. There's a larger spread. And those areas also just keep getting incorporated into what we understand of Delhi, right? So what does this future look like in this spread, right? In the spreading of where people live and how they congregate, one of the first things to always remember is when you preserve and conserve anything, you're preserving and conserving with the intent कि ये रहेगा यार 100 साल मेरे बाद भी रहना चाहिए, 100 साल 500 साल मेरे बाद रहना चाहिए ये. One of the things that we understood about recent areas that have been restored, that have been preserved, conserved, like the Sundar Nursery, have also been preserved and conserved with the intent that they outlast us. हम रहे ना रहे वो रहेगा. Because the horticulture there, for that matter, the monuments in the Sundar Nursery, they've also been revived. The Aga Khan Foundation has also really helped over there. There's multiple private-public partnerships that have kind of made that area what it is. It has won UNESCO highlights as well.
I've never been. I should go.
You can come with us on the 2040 walk.
Sweet.
So what we also wanted to push is that after a point, what will Delhi look like? One, where will we congregate? A lot of the times, it may be the monuments that outlast us simply because preservation and conservation means that they have to outlast you. Would you be able to live anywhere around it? Simply because those are no longer going to be areas where you'll be able to find space to live, but you'd also somewhere start occupying the NCR, the National Capital Region of this spread outside of Delhi. Where would you live? Where would you congregate? Would the decisions still be made in the Citadel area, which is basically what you'd understand as Rashtrapati Bhavan, where the major decisions get made? The bhavans that are there all around, still Lutyens Delhi, the radial roads. When you look at the city, how much would the city have shifted by then? How much of it would have shifted? Because right now, the city is so spread across so many different parts of Delhi, with its each unique hamlet having a certain type of majority of a certain ethnicity, an association with a certain type of food. Now, when air gets difficult to breathe, the water level is something we need to pay a lot more attention to than we do, and we have a food scarcity crisis in the country. Whether it may or may not affect you in Delhi, that is a big question mark. To contextualize all this while standing in Sundar Nursery, which will actually still remain, is kind of the point we want to make, that all this will happen, but this place and such places might remain sacrosanct, might remain intact. That is something we need to really, really think about. Food, water, air, right? And they're very bad metrics for Delhi NCR. So the future actually of Delhi needs to be contextualized in that context. Not in the glory, in the money, in all of that. I mean, all that, sure, that'll keep happening. But if all of this is not there, we will not be inhabiting over here. Would we be able to? Chalo, let me pose the question. Would we be able to?
Where would we go?
You tell me.
Because this is a very interesting problem when you think about it. Like, so people like me who live in Delhi and NCR, right? Well, I can speak for myself. There is merit to moving closer to where the money is, where the power is, where the connections are, where the entertainment is, where the cafes are, right? It's a higher cost of living. But then at the same time, for us, other people, it's not a metric, but I still think about, like, I'm still moving from bad air quality to bad air quality. There is no, when you think about, okay, let's talk about upwardly mobile, like how do you become upwardly mobile in your life, right? Like, I'm living here, now I want to move to the next place and the next place so that my quality of life gets better, right?
Sure.
Maybe I'll complete 6 of the 10 metrics that are like, koi bhi metrics ho sakte hain for a good life, but the other ones will be compromised, and over the years they'll become worse. Like you said, the air, the food scarcity, and the water. My point is, fir kya hoga? Like, would people start living up in the hills, commute as long as possible to get to Delhi? Because that's what's happening. Like in this city, for example, Faridabad, there were no traffic lights, or there was just one. Now there are so many.
Yeah, I just...
and this city has a huge commuter population. It's like there's this city, there's the colony that Nehru helped build once the refugees came in. Then an entire city that was just fields and farmlands sprung up. They call it Greater Faridabad. और वहाँ पे ऐसे लोग move कर गए that had offices in Delhi and Gurgaon and Noida but just couldn't live there. And they have a better quality of life here, I mean, beyond the air, and have bigger houses, but then they commute for 1.5 hours. It's just like New York or like London, right?
I was just going to say that it is like other such cities in the world where the population commutes from suburbs onto the city for work and back. Bombay kind of also lives on the same principle to an extent. So,
but do you think if Delhi ke log Faridabad, Gurgaon move? Because Gurgaon, a lot of people who are
a lot of people are also considering Gurgaon. I think you've to add one more metric to this, which is our age. When we talk about we're talking about generally what? A population under 40 that is able to do all this commute and right? But the population also being considered when we talk about the future of Delhi in cities of Delhi is our parents. See, climate change also means we've had heat waves this year. We've not had that in a very long, but we had heat waves this year. We had temperature drops in winter this year. The thing is, those extremes in temperature are also going to be a lot more difficult for the generations that are older to bear. नहीं सहन कर सकते ना इतनी गर्मी इतनी ठंडी उसके लिए preparation भी तो होनी चाहिए and Delhi infrastructurally is not, or maybe any city is not infrastructurally prepared for highs and lows in temperature like this, which were not expected for a city like that.
Correct.
So when you can't bear the heat, neither can you bear the cold, then there's also a generation more vulnerable than us that may not be able to kind of live with the aches and pains, physical aches and pains, जो जोड़ों में दर्द होता है. या अगर हम बात करें कि इतनी तपती गर्मी है कि हीट वेव की फीवर हो जाता है. ये सब चीज़ें maybe we are safe from that for a while because of our age.
But we're still carrying our age, by a few quarters at least.
Because of food, air, water, तो वैसे ही हम कितना जिएंगे वो क्वेश्चन मार्क है. लेकिन हमारे पेरेंट्स ये वाली जो वेदर एक्सट्रीम्स हैं उसमें भी एक लेवल की सफरिंग है, तो उनका क्या, मतलब उनके बारे में भी अगर हम सोचें, हाउ लॉन्ग वुड दे बी एबल टू लिव इन भाई एनी पार्ट ऑफ दिल्ली एनसीआर, फॉरगेट.
I can't believe just standing in Sundar Nasri and like just वो होता नहीं है where you're watching the world burn around you.
Yes, but it's not. I mean, it's not that type, not so dark, but maybe realistic was where we were going with it. Which is that the history and love for Delhi doesn't end at Lutyens' Delhi. One is that, and in the Delhis that you occupy after that, which our parents have occupied, which now we occupy, there's also a future. We will still be here by 2040s. Not, I'm not talking about like some. मैं 2100 की नहीं बात कर रही. 2040 is here. It's right. Not so far gone. You know, we're having these national governmental schemes for 2047 and all that. I mean, we are having all of that also. So we're here. We're around. You know, all this while. How will that work? How we're still going to be around. So I think that to speak in such a space, which also means that now everybody has to come for the Sundar Nursery walk, okay?
I don't think it'll be out by then though, sadly, the podcast.
It won't be out by November.
Oh no, for sure, it'll be out before, okay.
No, so the Cities of Delhi walks are being released November, December, Jan, Feb. There's a
Wonderful.
क्योंकि winter में तो कर सकते हैं, summer में होगा. And one of the most real life ways in which we wanted to release these walks in October because we thought winter comes in October and second half of October. But when we realized what is the temperature right now, we had to push our walk schedule कि ये नहीं हो पाएगा अभी. It might be too hot for certain people to be able to make it, which means that we also have to shift our winter calendars, which also means, by the way, seasonal crop calendars have to shift accordingly, etc. So some of the things that realistically one must always think about, and Sundar Nursery also is amazing that way because see, it also looks at horticultural flora and fauna. To talk about monuments and that in the same space was kind of the point here. That in this space, please consider this. There is a water body there. Please consider that. Where will all this go? So that's kind of why we wanted to situate it in Sundar Nursery. And now if Akash wants to change it, it can't happen because I have nationally announced it.
National announcement, I love it.
हो गया ये.
पर दिल्ली के अंदर और बाकी शहर कौन से हैं? Like जो, because the question that I couldn't ask when you were describing it is.
Right.
So, for example, let's take post-independence Delhi. Now you are looking at it from a sense of the residents who've moved there, the fervor in people. Is it attitudes? Are you looking at it from the sense of new houses springing up? Like what are the metrics you're using?
So we want to make the city the protagonist, right? What that means is pre-Lutyens there was a very well understood protagonist. Lal Kot, Tomar Rajput ने बनाया था, इधर था, दिख गया. Mehroli इसने बनाया था, यहाँ पे था, दिख गया. लोग यहाँ pray करते थे, यहाँ पे रहते थे because they were also smaller, right? They were very small. दीन पन्ना हुमायूं ने बनाया था, ऐसे बनाया था, यहाँ पे था, फोर्ट वॉल्स ये थी, वगैरह वगैरह हो गया. When it comes to post-independence, see what Lutyens wanted, what Baker wanted, they designed Delhi a certain way, etc., which was also for a certain type of Delhi occupant, which is the person working in the government, which is the trader, which is the business family, etc. Post-independence, heartbreakingly also, a lot of refugee camps are being set up in Delhi. Those are the ones that we're going to talk about because immediately there was an influx of population exchange. Influx meaning it was an exchange actually. What were the refugee camps that were set up which ended up becoming colonies? इसके लिए walk पे आना पड़ेगा, please.
Damn.
Yeah. What are the refugee colonies that was refugee camps that were set up that immediately had to become colonies because there was nowhere else for them to go. After this sort of new immediate construction from the what is now the Housing and Urban Affairs, but immediate construction which they started was that these people needed proper places, pakka places to live. So one was that. So there was a huge deployment of construction tenders ASAP. बना दो भाई, घर बनाओ उनके लिए. One was that. The other is, okay, once you've done that, what about the Delhi after? Which is where, you have your white revolution, green revolution, you have all of these schemes that are coming in place because you want to also do a self-determination कि खादी से तो हम जीत गए जो भी, लेकिन उसके बाद क्या?
As a country, right?
As a country,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of how each state gets represented in Delhi, cottage industries start growing in Delhi. What are the places where all of these shops come about? What are the places where people gather just to understand, okay, this is kind of like, oh, this is
the Andhra Pradesh corner of Delhi. This is the...
Or these are where things from Andhra Pradesh get sold. These are where things from Goa get sold. These are where things from this get sold. So there's a huge cottage industry burst. And self-determination also means that you also produce within your country and you purchase what you produce within your country. That was the whole point. 60s, 70s, we wanted that while having trading relations, but that is kind of what you want. How did that reflect in the national capital of the country? That.
But sorry, again, is it emotions? Is it architecture? Like how will you...
It's mostly architecture. So we go through certain architectural spaces. Now, we also push out of monuments. We also sometimes cover monuments, but a lot of this has to happen walking from one point A to point B in a part of the city where the rest of the city is bustling. Because that's also how you make them understand this. So you also wanted to step out of monuments a little bit and step back into them again. But step out of monuments because the city after a point is also not within the monuments, right? The city is also in the streets. The city is also in different places of worship. The city is also in commuting from what used to be an office hub at one point. So that. How to communicate that. And then the massive burst of opening up your economy, 90s onwards, right? What are these new brands? How did that change the indigenous industries that we have? What did we start buying? What did we start aspiring to? How does that look commercially in shopping centers? How does that look in where you bought what you bought? And suddenly, some people that had a lot more of foreign direct investment, eateries change, etc., which eatery became popular after and overtaking some waste ones as well. So where does that shift happen? Where are the places you can see this shift? So we walk in that space where you can see.
कुछ example है ऐसा, जैसे मेरे को जो contemporary example पता है. I remember Ansal Plaza was the shit, right? And then Select City Walk came on, and all these new brands came out, and Ansal Plaza like declined.
Yeah. So that's Ansal to Select City, right?
Yeah.
The CP, Palika Bazaar, and the LIC building become one other way to look at this. Because all of Janpath was dedicated for different states to represent themselves.
Janpath, really?
Yeah, because all the cottage emporiums, cottage industries, they had their dedicated shops over there.
अंदर दुकानें बना रखी हैं, जैसे jeans की दुकानें हैं बहुत सारी, जैसे tailors हैं बहुत सारे.
Now they are that.
Okay.
वो हुआ कैसे और क्यों? वो वहाँ चल के पता चलता है. You are getting all my locations out? No. तो और क्यों? वन इज तो ये हो गया, जो तो हम जी रहे हैं, लेकिन ये क्यों हुआ और कैसे हुआ? और वो आर्किटेक्चरल शिफ्ट्स इन द बिल्डिंग्स, बिकॉज वन इज दिस एडविन लुटियन सॉर्ट ऑफ ब्रिटिश कॉलोनियल बिल्डिंग्स एटसेट्रा, ऑल दैट इज़ फाइन. लेकिन जब साकेत में बढ़ने लगे बिल्डिंग्स, जीके में बढ़ने लगे बिल्डिंग्स, हौस खास में बिल्डिंग्स बढ़ने लगे, what did that architecture look like? That was a very new Delhi sort of बना ये New Delhi. और वो New Delhi दिखता कैसा था?
So New Delhi was mostly South Delhi then?
New Delhi was a spate of newer set of constructions that went into a lot of private hands beyond just the government decrees that would get these colonies made. So sometimes you'd have, government sector quarters that were being made for. So that is one era of Delhi actually, one type of way to look at Delhi's architecture. Then you suddenly had a lot of private builders acquiring different types of land to build different type of housing styles, different type of like apartment styles, etc., which were also not seen a lot in Delhi. So how did that happen? Because Delhi also has a lot of airports and a lot of security, so you can't build above a certain height, but we have that now. कैसे हुआ वो? क्यों हुआ वो? So one is to keep pushing that, and then it comes to the 2000s Delhi, the ones that we've inhabited as we were growing up, where you talk about Ansal to Select City, for example. Right. Where we talk about what was the place to live and how did that change for the working professional coming from different cities over here. Where would they want to live? What is the address that they want to have? So stuff like that.
Such as, like, could we, अगर हम बिना location reveal करें, ये ऐसे बात कर सकते हैं. आज हम 2022 में बैठे. Let's talk about 2004 for example. 2004 के अंदर या 2005 ले लेते हैं. ठीक है. What would be an aspirational neighborhood? And I'm sure it's not Horse Cars Village or Green Park for the cool indie people, right? Or Vasant Kunj for that matter.
Vasant Kunj still was Vasant Kunj is like evergreen. Vasant Kunj is
evergreen, like aspirational neighborhood.
Right, yeah, to an extent. For the working professional coming in from outside, see, 2000s was a time, at least in terms of people's history, from what we're still researching and trying to understand. It was when the liberalization, privatization, globalization started taking hold. So a lot of the offices, while still in CP, started expanding within Delhi and around Delhi. And here I am talking about a lot of offices at one point increasing in, for example, I would say, you try and get offices within residential spaces like a Swaminagar. You try and get your offices within, pre-WeWork, right? There was none of all of these type of coagulated office spaces and everything. So you would try and get, certain offices in club rent together and get like one layered place in Jangpura, one layered place in Tefcol if you could. And then those are not affordable places to live. So also when the working professional came from elsewhere, they would also try and live around these areas to be able to do commute. Not that these places are still affordable to live even now. So a lot of this change of the 2000s, which became maybe the most difficult for us to map, I'll admit that. Because at that time, one of the things is records, right? In 2000s, we have to actually talk to people. There were not a lot of records we could go to very easily, surprisingly enough, because this is what we wanted to tap, that where were people living. So we also had to start talking to people. So a lot of the post-70s onwards, when we wanted to shift away from whatever the government was doing, because then the people started becoming a different type of protagonist, we also started talking to a lot more people. कि अच्छा 20 साल पहले कहाँ रह रहे थे, उसके पहले कहाँ रह रहे थे. So a lot of this work we had to do.
Why didn't records exist, for example? Like, because for governmental stuff it's easier to get records. But
yeah, governmental stuff is easy to get records. We also started delving into magazine sources. कौन पढ़ता है ना यार अभी physical magazine, उस टाइम पे तो वो ही थी ना.
By the way, I went to a dentist. This is such a hilarious thing. मैं dentist के पास गया और एक बंदा ना सिर्फ disgusted face के साथ एक magazine को देख रहा था. कहता this is from 2011 और वहाँ पे 6 magazine 2011 की रखी हुई थी और him and I had a laugh. मैंने कहा उस टाइम पे कौन बड़ा स्टार था, दिखाना ज़रा. And it just serves to prove, oh my God, we don't even think about covers and like what was relevant.
Exactly, right?
Yeah?
We don't. So we wanted to get a little bit outside of government records also, because the moment you also open up your economy, there are also so many other players, right? So you also started to get into a little bit into populist people's history कि भाई घूमने के लिए कहाँ जाते थे. So for example, across this, the one thing that has remained constant, which may or may not change now, is doing a picnic at India Gate. Regardless of...
It has the same vibe as Sundar Nursery, right? वो sacrosanct वो रहेगा ना?
हमेशा रहेगा. I think India Gate picnic is a lot more democratically accessible in ways that Sundar Nursery is not, because there you need a ticket.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the Sundar Nursery ticket is, between 50 to 70 to 100 rupees, which is higher than what you'd expect. For example, like a National Museum ticket is 20 rupees.
Right.
Whereas India Gate is India Gate. So you go.
we it's really true. We do have very few democratic, aesthetically beautiful places to enjoy. And
we found that the picnic at India Gate, not just as a nostalgia, but like as a thing to do even now, that has remained. So I would say कि चलो ठीक है यार, यहाँ ऑफिस पॉपुलेशन यहाँ से यहाँ गई, यहाँ से यहाँ गई, यहाँ से ये लोग यहाँ गए, यहाँ वहाँ गए, ये हाउसिंग यहाँ चेंज हो गया, वहाँ चेंज हो गया, ठीक है, that is fine. With the metro line increasing, and 2000s were also where the tracks were being put and everything, I mean the things being decided. By the time that I remember in 2010, we could also take like our first few metro rides and everything, which also meant that one of the biggest things, office going population 2000s, also had to, kind of, the other thing you had to is it close to a metro? That would change also where you'd want to rent your house. It had to be connected. If you couldn't afford going back and forth, we're talking about pre-Ola, pre-Uber, everything. You can't afford the taxi. You can't afford...
Also, Google Maps is just barely working at this point.
Barely, right? So then you'd be like, acha, metro line hai, acha, bus ka route kaisa hai. So those ways were also interesting determinants.
The boom of public transportation.
Interlayer public transportation. It's not just autos and it's not just taxis, right? Buses were always there. Commonwealth gave a big boost to buses, and then metro. So it was an intersectional public transport boost that changed the way people wanted to live in the city. That changed the citadel and the congregation and the city protagonist.
So where's the citadel now? Is it spread across?
You tell me. I think citadel is here. We are.
Yeah.
It's us.
Really?
No. I think the citadel now, you tell me, where do you think is the decision-making process right now centered in Delhi?
In Delhi, it's very weird. So I have two answers to that. Number one, I think it's still... It's not CP, because you would assume the center is where the decision-making is. CP is sort of like a commercial center. I think the decision-making is still largely in the halls of parliament and all of those places for sure.
Yeah.
But then some very interesting things are happening from a governmental think tank standpoint in South Delhi also. Haus Khas Green Park have come up. Safdarjung is a very prominent neighborhood. Jorbagh, all of these places, yahan pe bhi ho rahi hai. The money is in Gurgaon. Because anyone who's been in Gurgaon, they say ki...
But also money is in Gurgaon and Noida? Or you just say Gurgaon?
Oh, see, Noida is मेरे को ऐसा लगता है कि Noida... I've barely been to Noida a few times, so I don't want to comment without knowing. But Gurgaon, like Noida, I still think is more like real estate money. Gurgaon is also that, but Gurgaon के अंदर, so my friend told me that Fortune 500 companies दुनिया के अंदर अगर 500 हैं, उनमें से 300 headquarter Gurgaon में है.
Okay, fine.
You know,
Gurgaon.
yeah. So then I was like, why? Right? So clearly the money is there. Bangalore is where the tech is at. Mumbai is where the media industry is at. Delhi is where maybe you get licenses and permissions.
A lot of political power. Delhi is a political power center, like Bombay would be the financial one. That's definitely there in terms of that decision making. But I think when you add the aspect of money and this type of control and power, maybe this is something, you know, even I'm learning as I'm speaking with you, that if you're talking about so many headquarters being there in Gurgaon, which you're right, yeah, that's a different aspect of control and power and citadel making, which I must say we had not considered in the cities before because it had not spread this way.
Right. Huh. Like there is, because you might have like a publishing house in Delhi that's powerful.
Yeah.
You might have a fashion house in Delhi that's powerful.
Lawyers' offices.
Because
right? The high courts.
But then all the biggest startups and companies where the money is at, that's in Gurgaon. Ye mere ko jab pata laga, I was like, I can meet more interesting people and I can be around art and architecture and history in Delhi. But there is also citadel in Gurgaon.
So maybe like there's a tri or dual citadel ship that is forming.
Probably.
कुछ हम ऐसे डाल देंगे 2000 walk डाल देंगे.
So this is so fascinating. Like, does this take up a lot of your time just doing this?
Yeah, I also used to work 7 days a week, but now like I'm still working 7 days a week because the 5 days get dedicated to the projects and 5 days of the week, like the Monday to Friday, dedicated to projects, writing, submissions, students.
Submissions in the many colleges that you teach at?
Submissions that are coming to me, and then submissions that of all the corrected assignments that I have to do to the faculty department, and I'm applying for residencies, this, that, and everything. So the stuff that I'm doing to increase my curatorial writing practice, so on and so forth. That keeps going on in the first 5 days. Saturday, Sunday are golden days for recce, reconnaissance. So what we do is, and we also want to release statistics of this, for one final walk of 1.5 hours, we would have to finalize that on foot and off foot, which is when we are doing research, would have probably spent 60 hours to get that thing done.
Just like a comedian stand-up?
Of course, because it is the critical mass of how many times and how many ways you tackle that thing, whereas the output that the world sees, which is in so many industries, it's the same. That may be 1.5, 2 hours only. But what goes into that is years and years of research, and this is 60 hours actively dedicated to that. But the reason it is 60 hours is because Akash and I have been doing independently these tours since what? or 2000. I've been doing tours since 2012. I've been doing it since then.
10 years in the making, huh?
Yeah. So
cheers to that.
Yeah, so of course. And it's the same thing, like one of my colleagues told me that there's so much differentiated knowledge that you have. Now is the time to collect. Like, it's been 8 years, 9 years that you've been around. Now is the time to collect. And to push that, I thought 100 how-tos was the best way to push that, because, you started today's conversation with such an interesting aspect, which is how to understand art. Like, how does one even go about doing that, and how do I kind of reciprocate that curiosity? So 100 how-tos also is basically, I had written 100 questions. Like, what are 100 questions either I have been asked or I still have? And remember, they're like as simple as how to label an artwork, to how to price an artwork, which gets slightly complicated, how to negotiate a contract in the arts industry, how to negotiate a consulting fee, how to curate an exhibition, how to run a national, international level art fair. Increasing complexity, how to write an artist statement, how to write a grants application. And I kind of collected all those questions, and now is like the time where I start releasing them, one in open format, which is the simplest of questions which need to be part of a curriculum, like how to label an artwork, etc.
Right.
Something which is in group formats, which is basically, how to write an artist statement, because writing again becomes one of the, like reading, writing also becomes one of those skills within our schooling system that need a lot more rigor. And that rigor is complicit with what type of access you have, etc., right? So how would you write all of this? And there group sessions for the same, and then one-on-one career mentorship sessions. What do I do next? वो वाले.
ये what do I do next तो staple है YouTube India का.
है ना? So I find that there was a way, and this was the time to kind of take all that knowledge and push it out.
When does it come out? This, or is it a series of posts?
It's a series.
On Instagram, right?
Yeah.
It's on your bio. People can see that. Yeah.
This is on my bio, and this is on Instagram, and it'll keep continuing. There'll be group classes, single classes, whatever. So this is just a way to push out, because these are the questions sometimes people are also scared to ask.
Yeah.
And they shouldn't be. No, shouldn't be scared to ask this. This is what keeps us grounded and accountable to be able to answer these questions.
Shaleen, yaar, if, for example, I know owning art is expensive and people can arrive at it as they please. But does reading about, जैसे art history होती है जो चीज़, full disclaimer, the only art history book I've read is Ways of Seeing by John Berger, and I keep recommending it to everyone क्योंकि I am like outline. मैंने सारी बातें बता दी podcast में. लेकिन does it help to buy fat books, guidebooks on कि यार भाई ये देखो ये रविंद्रनाथ टैगोर का स्टाइल था, उसने ऐसे बनाया है, ये like, does that help in any way? Because abhi typically क्या होता है, let me just lay it out for you as I've seen it in my experience of doing YouTube and like understanding the sort of comments I get, the feedback I get, is ये एक बड़े niche चीज़ है जो आर्ट हिस्ट्री के स्टूडेंट्स या आर्ट वाले स्टूडेंट्स ही परस्यू करते हैं और उसके अंदर भी फिर इंडिविजुअल इंटरेस्ट आता है. अभी मोस्टली क्या होता है, like you'll have a book about Indian independence, you'll have a book about generally, ठीक है, business के बारे में, tech के बारे में, sociology, psychology are big. I'm just talking about as subjects, right? Art history is largely ignored. I've seen a lot of it abroad, right? And when you look at key things to do in a city is typically when you're in a new city, I always do that. I type things to do in Delhi, things to do in London. Overwhelmingly, museums सबसे ऊपर आते हैं. Is like a thing you can do, right? इधर भी आते हैं, but then you look at the actual habits of people, it's very less. So there's clearly a huge divide between this, like, how do I explain? Like, मैं चाहता हूँ सीखना, but I largely feel alone in this. You know what I mean? So are there books, general resources people can start, or is it simply like whatever works for you?
It is always whatever works for you, because that's the easiest way you will get connected with it. लेकिन मैं ये कहना चाहूँगी कि जो पैंडमिक कोविड अभी ख़त्म नहीं हुआ है, डिस्क्लेमर, लेकिन लास्ट 2.5 years के बाद अब जब हम रेकी के लिए जाते हैं ना, म्यूज़ियम्स जाते हैं, कहीं भी जाते हैं, हर टाइम पे हमें बहुत लोग मिलते हैं, बहुत एवरीडे अटेंडीज़, वी फाइंड अ लॉट ऑफ देम देयर. तो मैं ये भी कहना चाहूँगी कि अगर म्यूज़ियम है आपके पास, टूर पे मत जाओ, कुछ भी मत करो, खुद जाओ म्यूज़ियम, जो समझ आता है समझो. वन इज़ दैट, बिकॉज व्हेन इट कम्स टू आर्ट हिस्ट्री, द ईजिएस्ट एक्सप्लेनर इज़ एक्चुअली द नेशनल गैलरी ऑफ मॉडर्न आर्ट. वन इज़ इन Delhi, one is in Bombay, one is in Bangalore. They have routine free for all public tours, etc. The entry fee is also very very affordable. And एक तो वो तरीका है समझने का, वहाँ कोई और आपको समझा रहा है, या आप जाओ जो टाइटल में पढ़ा है जो आपको समझ आता है, एक वो तरीका है.
सॉरी, जस्ट बाय द वे, प्राइवेट गैलरीज फ्री हैं व्यू करने के लिए, कभी भी नेशनल गैलरी पेड है.
Yeah, but minimum tickets like 20 to 30, 40, 50 rupees tickets will be there for Indian citizens.
Okay.
फॉरेन है तो भाई देते रहो. तो एक वो है. दूसरा है, जब आप किताबों की बात करते हैं, ऐसा नहीं है कि आर्ट हिस्ट्री की किताबें नहीं हैं. अभी हाल ही में क्लास 12 और 11 में आर्ट हिस्ट्री और फाइन आर्ट का एक एक्चुअल कोर्स करिकुलम इंक्लूड हो गया है.
हमारे यहाँ तो मजाक था फाइन आर्ट.
हाँ, लेकिन अब वो properly introduced हो चुका है.
As an additional subject?
Yeah, as an additional subject.
Wonderful.
So finally. You have that in the mainstream NCERT, CBSE curriculum. So one is that. ठीक है. The other is, अगर आप books चाहते हैं, मैं आपके podcast के साथ एक bibliography release कर दूँगी.
बिल्कुल, we can add it.
I would definitely, like I send like a reading list for almost every topic that I've covered.
Yeah.
Of different gradation.
I think that'll be wonderful. We can totally do that.
Advanced, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That I would love to send that. So one is that where I can directly say that, okay, this is stuff I've read which I can.
You can curate.
I can curate a bibliography. किताबें तो मैं बता दूंगी, मोटी हैं, तगड़ी हैं, सस्ती है नहीं है, वो भी खुद पे डिपेंड करता है. लेकिन मैं फिर भी ये कहूँगी, best and easiest way to get yourself closer to art or to history is to go in the spaces where it is displayed.
It requires your physical body there. Can't do it at home.
You can do it at home. There's Google Arts and Culture. There are 3D maps of almost all, by the way, the national level museums that you have. All of them have picture galleries that are available online. ऐसा नहीं है कि आप नहीं देख सकते. आपकी सिटी में बैठे हुए आप दूसरी सिटी का पूरा म्यूजियम, पूरा गैलरी सब देख सकते हैं. लेकिन still, now that we're in a physical digital world again, I would still encourage for you to go and see yourself, simply because the lens will develop like that. One is that. Two, अब तो सारे among multiple schemes of the cultural ministry, a lot of the national museums, national galleries have either a 3D map or an interactive map, or they have had picture galleries that are available to the public now. So you have that as a very easy resource right there with you. I would still push for this before even the reading begins. But they are symbiotic. मतलब एक दूसरे को फीड करता है और वो इसको फीड करता है, वो तो है ही. तो वो मैं आपको क्यूरेटेड बिब्लियोग्राफी दी.
बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. ब्रिटिश म्यूजियम आपको कितना पसंद करता है?
उनको तो मेरे बारे में कुछ पता ही नहीं है.
अच्छा. Did they not react when it happened? Did they accept it?
There was no, see, it's a guerrilla tour, which means that it is an unofficial tour. Nowhere has the Unfiltered History Tour said that they are an official. No, like they've said that they are an unofficial tour. It's a guerrilla tour, which means that it is only meant to enhance vantage points that the British Museum will officially not give out. हमें प्यार करता है नहीं. सबसे बड़ी सीक्रेट तो ये है कि जब मैं सोआज में पढ़ रही थी लंदन में, मैंने ब्रिटिश म्यूजियम में इंटर्न किया था.
That's crazy. So you had ideas about this looting before then also?
I was writing my thesis on looting then and there.
You wrote your thesis on looting only?
Yeah, my thesis is titled Drunk with Plunder.
Wow.
Yeah, situating object biographies looted during the 1857 mutiny of British India.
That's specifically your thesis?
That is my thesis. I wrote that when I was 21 and a half. Yeah.
Fascinating.
While I was doing that, I was also working as an intern at the British Museum, and I was working at the publishing house of British Museum. लेकिन मैं जाती थी अंदर देखने की, भाई ये लोग पैसा कैसे बनाते हैं. मुझे बहुत गुजराती हूँ ना, तो थोड़े पूरे टाइम पैसा कैसे बनाते हैं. किताबों से तो बन नहीं रहा, क्योंकि वो तो मैं ही उनकी पूरी कैटलॉगिंग कर रही थी. रिटेल की दुकान में भगदड़ मची, हमेशा इतने लोग खरीद रहे हैं, रिटेल से पैसा आता है, कैसे आता है? फिर मैं देख रही थी कि भाई थोड़ी चीज़ों के लिए टिकट है वहाँ पे, यू हैव टू पे, सम थिंग्स आर फ्री. द थिंग्स दैट आर फ्री which they have received the most social capital on, the Rosetta Stone from Egypt, Amravati sculptures from India, for example, are the ones that they have looted. At that time also I would wonder कि इसके लिए पूरी दुनिया से लोग आ रहे हैं ये देखने के लिए, तो ये है इनका social capital. इनको पैसा तो इससे मिलता है जो है इज्जत के फॉर्म में. दूसरा endowments, donations, दुनिया भर के तो इनको वो मिल रहे हैं. पैसा तो ये लोग इसकी वजह से मिल रहा है ना इन्हें. हाउ इज दिस दी ओके? हाउ? मेक मी अंडरस्टैंड हाउ दैट इज ओके. और मैं इसमें ये भी ऐड करना चाहूँगी कि भाई ठीक है, पैसा वैसा तो उनको इस सब से मिल रहा है, और हमेशा उनकी ये पेटेंट लाइन रही है जो हर प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने भी बोला है ब्रिटिश, दैट देयर हिस्ट्री एंड हेरिटेज इज ओपन फॉर द वर्ल्ड टू सी. इट्स फ्री फॉर ऑल, इट्स फ्री फॉर ऑल. आके देखो, आके देखो. हमारे देश में कौन भर रहा है भाई लंदन आने जाने की टिकट? कहाँ से आ रहे हैं ये पैसे? कौन सी ये डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज जान रही है वहाँ पे देखने अपना ही इतिहास? वहाँ पे देखो पैसे दे के. इट कांट बी अफोर्डेबल फॉर दीज कंट्रीज दैट वर फॉर्मर कॉलोनीज टू कीप गोइंग देयर एंड सीइंग इट. अरे तो तुमने फ्री रखते हो, उससे हमें क्या फ़ायदा हुआ? हम तो थोड़ी ना जाके देख सकते हैं. सो दैट struck me as unfair even when I was that age. But I think in 10 years is when I have articulated the language of what about that is unfair, and I can express that. That is what takes time in your journey to kind of take all that research and push it out there and be like, this is why it's unfair. तो ये था, तो काम तो मैंने वहाँ पे किया है.
काम 1 मिनट दोगे? मैं फैन ऑफ कर रहा हूँ बस.
Of course.
Quiet finally. Yeah, that's crazy. But I'm just wondering कि ये सेम चीज़ इंडिया करता है क्या, कि ब्रिटिश ऐसे कुछ लूट के रखा हुआ हमने? हमारे पास है कोई लूट?
ब्रिटेन की नहीं, ऐसा
उनके पास कुछ होगा भी नहीं शायद. कुछ ऐसा है स्पेक्टेकुलर?
हमारे पास किसी और कंट्री का
हो सकता है.
डिपेंड्स. अब आप पाकिस्तान, बांग्लादेश, म्यांमार, श्रीलंका को कंसिडर करें तो
अच्छा, like that sort of neighbors.
It can be contentious simply because when it is one land and then when it is divided, and the dividing forces were also very haphazard lines drawn on a map by the British, division of resources was not equal. Now I have to get ready for all the comments.
No, that's okay. Sorry. I mean, you have to get...
I have to get ready for all the comments. But there was unequal distribution of resources, like whether it is museum collection, so on and so forth. India had a larger landmass, so we got a lot more.
But we don't have any artwork or any valuable artifacts from, say, Australia, Germany, ऐसे ये नहीं.
You've opened a very interesting line of thought. Maybe I should research more about it. Maybe like I can admit that my knowledge about this would be less, because what happens is former colonies, you only expect them to have things taken out,
right,
or amongst themselves to be like an issue. अच्छा नहीं ये मेरा, ये border के पहले इधर था, border के इधर था, ये that's more what is what I have read. But at the moment I'll say no, but let me read about this a little more.
Sure, sounds good. Haha. That's also a very good thing. One thing I really liked about your Instagram is you mentioned, I think the best thing I've learned in my life is to be a student or a learner more than anything else.
Always.
हाँ.
मतलब पढ़ाई तो जारी है, बाकी पढ़ाना वो सब तो चलता रहेगा, पढ़ाई तो जारी है.
Yeah. Well, it's been great having you on Dostcast. I will say that. I don't know how time passed, and I certainly feel privileged to be educated in so many different things. In a fun manner, you know.
But thank you so much for asking me questions that some questions that I didn't have answers of, which is, you know, I have to go and now make notes कि अच्छा इसके बारे में थोड़ा और पढ़ना है. And really, thank you for how free flowing this was, which was not something that I expected. So thank you for that.
Yeah, बस देखो जी, ये तो काम है हमारा, ये तो हमें करना ही होता है. आप तो समझते ही हैं. No, I also think what really helps is, so you have a public facing role, right?
Yes,
and that I think that enables, like, you're used to being interrupted and being asked questions, right? which say might not be the case with someone else. So ये तो एक mutual चीज़ होती है.
हाँ.
So लोग कहाँ people can follow you, and Shaleen Wadhwana, that's the full name Instagram,
yeah,
correct?
Absolutely.
And then you have a bunch of other
everything
profiles.
I'm creating
Yeah.
is on my profile.
On
everything
your profile.
I'm creating or everything I've created is on my profile.
Yeah.
Whether it is walk schedules, whether it is the courses that I'm teaching, whether it is training platform sessions that I'm opening up, it's all there.
So abhi, I think this get released in the first week of October, like late September or first week of October is what we're looking at. Any walks in that duration beyond the one on 24th or anything else that you're hosting?
After that, right? So November onwards, Cities of Delhi is on. Okay. Please come.
I will come.
So one is that, definitely to look forward to. I run the Chime project with one of my musician collaborators, Nymphia Norona.
The Chime project.
Chime project. So we have music and history walks that we do at the National Museum. Those are scheduled for multiple weekends in October. So that will also be put up over there.
Yeah.
And काफ़ी यार मैं बहुत पढ़ा रही हूँ इस महीने बहुत colleges में जाके पढ़ा रही हूँ. So that's where I'll be. Yeah. I'll be in Bombay and I'll be in Bangalore. So yeah.
Wonderful. And a little bit about this Chime project. I saw a couple of photos where you guys were looking at presumably old sitars.
Yes, actually, we have an interesting relationship with the education department of the National Museum. We've combined music and history. We look at the history of the Indian subcontinent through music. 4,500 years, music through sculptures, paintings, artifacts, songs. We look at music also through the obvious forms, which is trying to look at it through musical instruments in the Sharan Rani Bakliwal Musical Gallery at the National Museum. And we've been doing it so consistently and for so long. The National Museum is very happy with us. Love you. They invited us, Independence Day celebrations at the National Museum. They invited us to do our tour. International Museum Day celebrations, they invite us to do our tour. So it's kind of become like a signature music history tour. That is something that we do often on repeat.
Wonderful. Someone messaged me when they saw a story, when they saw you on my stories, like, oh my God, you met her. She's a fantastic curator.
नाम वाम बता देना है, मैं थैंक यू आगे बोलना चाहूँगी.
ठीक है बता दूँगा, बाद में बता दूँगा बाद में. सही से नहीं यार, बहुत मज़े आया. Thank you for doing this and thank you for giving us that tour at IAF. It really opened me up. I mean, I also saw you giving tours throughout when I was, like doing my own bidding there. It's a fun thing. And thank you for teaching people the way you teach and to make it fun and more accessible, because I still have a few portraits / जो वो exhibits बोलते हैं, exhibits from that time in my head that you described, right? I because एक चीज़ होती है जैसे you can go and you can read the epitaph, right? And like,
absolutely.
And then someone is like, okay, इसमें 36 चीज़ें हम लोग सिर्फ 10 देखेंगे, but then each has a very strong narrative. You really enjoy that. Like people don't value, at least, I mean, I value it now, the deliberate, painstaking effort it takes to curate something. It's like, ये 10 चीज़ें अगर दिखा देना इस तरीके से इस order के अंदर, तो शायद लोगों का अच्छा experience हो जाए. So
very much my process, and thank you for succinctly putting my process across. Yeah.
बस यार, thank you for the service, Shaleen.
Thank you so much.
सही है. People can follow you on Shaleen Wadhwana where there's everything else. As always, don't forget to subscribe to Dostcast if you've been tuning in till this long, and see you next Tuesday or Friday or whenever the next Dostcast releases. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Wonderful.